Hi guys, tonight we're stepping into the complete history of salt, the tiny white crystal that once stood close to power, hunger, trade, survival, and yes, sometimes wealth greater than gold. What made people dig into mountains, boil seawater for days, cross deserts, tax peasants, build roads, and start rebellions over something you now shake casually over fries? You can almost see it already. Moonlight on a salt flat, a clay bowl of brine steaming beside a fire, a traveller touching a grain to the tongue and realising, very quietly, that life has a flavour. So, before you settle into the story, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you are listening from and what your local time is, because somewhere, someone is hearing this while the kettle cools, the room softens, and the night gets kind. Now, dim the lights. You're standing in a world before cities, before coins, before kings have learned to put their faces on metal and pretend that solves everything. The air is damp, heavy with leaf mould and smoke. Somewhere nearby, water moves over stones with a soft, patient sound. You feel the ground under your bare feet, cool and uneven, and the smell of wet earth rises like a slow breath from the dark. You're hungry, but not starving, not tonight. The people around you have found roots, berries, eggs, and maybe the meat of a small animal brought down with more effort than dignity. No one says the word mineral, no one says electrolyte, no one says sodium chloride, because that would ruin the mood and also require several thousand years of chemistry. But your body knows something your language does not yet hold. It knows salt. At first, salt is not a luxury. It is not a tax. It is not a symbol carved into law or prayer. It is a need felt in the mouth, in the muscles, in the tired heaviness that follows heat and sweat. You taste it in blood. You taste it in tears. You taste it on skin after a long walk beneath a hard sun. It is already part of you, invisible and necessary. A tiny agreement between the body and the world. Early humans likely learned salt through instinct as much as observation. Animals helped. You watch deer gather near a pale patch of earth, licking at a mineral lick with serious little faces, as if attending a very exclusive banquet where the dress code is antlers. Wild cattle, goats, elephants, and many other animals seek salty soil or stone. Humans, being clever and nosy, notice. You follow tracks. You kneel where animals kneel. You touch the earth, bring a bit to your tongue, and there it is sharp, clean, strangely satisfying. The mainstream fact is simple and enormous: humans need salt to survive. Sodium helps nerves signal, muscles move, and fluids balance in the body. Without enough, life begins to wobble. With too much, life complains in other ways, because the body is a dramatic but precise little kingdom. Long before anyone understands the science, people learn the feeling. Salt steadies food. Salt wakes up flavour. Salt answers a craving that seems to come from somewhere older than thought. Around a small fire, you watch meat roasting on a branch. Fat spits. Smoke curls into your hair and clothing. Someone has brought a lump of salty earth or a crust scraped from a drying pool. A little is rubbed onto the meat. The smell changes. The taste deepens. Everyone notices. Nobody writes a review, thankfully, but the lesson stays. Food can be altered by this pale substance. It can be made better. More importantly, it can be made to last. That discovery is one of the great turning points. Quiet but world-shaping. In warm places, meat spoils quickly, fish rots, plants wilt, hunger is never far away. Then salt enters the story as a keeper. It pulls moisture from food. It makes life difficult for many of the tiny organisms that cause decay. Though your ancient self does not know about bacteria, you only know that salted flesh survives longer. Salted fish can travel. Salted hides can be worked. A winter store becomes more possible. Tomorrow becomes less terrifying. You hold a strip of salted meat between your fingers. It is rough, dry, and stiff at the edges. It smells smoky, strong, and faintly marine, even far from the sea. You chew slowly. It is not fine dining. No one is pairing it with a delicate beverage, but it means security, and security has always been one of humanity's deepest flavours. There is a quirky tidbit here, soft enough for bedtime and strange enough to keep one eye open. In some places, people may have eaten ash from burned plants because certain ashes contain mineral salts. Imagine the first person stirring grey powder into food and saying, in whatever gesture language existed then, "Trust me, this makes dinner less depressing." It sounds odd, but plant ash has been used in many traditional food ways to change taste, texture, or nutrition. Salt, in its many forms, was not always a neat white crystal. Sometimes it was mud, crust, ash, brine, or a bitter lump carried in a pouch. You walk toward the coast now in imagination, where the sea breathes in the dark. The air tastes different there. It clings to your lips. Waves fold and unfold, leaving shining traces on rocks, in shallow pools. The sun drinks the water away, and a pale film remains. You crouch and touch it. The crystals are sharp against the skin, fragile, glittering, almost magical. The ocean has left a message you can eat, but historians still argue whether early humans first valued salt mostly for bodily need, for food preservation, or for the way it improved taste. The answer may not be one neat path. Human history rarely walks in a straight line. No matter how much textbooks try to comb its hair, in some regions salt was everywhere. Along coasts or near natural deposits, it may have seemed ordinary. In other landscapes, it was scarce, mysterious, and worth a journey. Need flavour, and preservation probably braided together slowly, like fibres twisted into cord. You begin to see how a mineral becomes a map. If salt lies near the sea, people return to the shore. If it seeps from springs, they remember the place. If it hides in rock, they chip and scrape. These are not yet trade routes with names. They are habits, footpaths, shared knowledge, a grandmother's gesture toward a hill, a hunter's memory of where animals gather, a child learning that the white crust on a stone is not snow, not fungus, not bird nonsense, but something useful. The night grows cooler. The fire sinks lower. Around you, people settle, wrapped in skins or woven grasses, listening to insect pulse in the dark. Somewhere, a baby fusses and quiets. Someone turns a piece of preserved meat in their hand, planning, perhaps without words, for days when hunting fails. This is how salt begins its long reign, not with crowns, not with armies, but with bodies, hunger, and the delicate human wish to keep life from slipping away too quickly. In your palm, a few crystals catch the firelight. They look small, almost nothing. Yet inside them is a future of roads, wages, laws, kitchens, caravans, temples, mines, monopolies, and marches to the sea. For now, though, they are only a taste on the tongue, bright as a spark, ancient as thirst. You walk into a quieter revolution, one with no trumpets, no banners, and very little personal space. The age of farming has begun in many parts of the world, and life is changing in ways both useful and deeply inconvenient. People settle longer in one place. They plant grain. They keep animals. They make pots, build houses, clear fields, and discover that staying put means you can store food, but also that everyone now has opinions about where the goats should sleep. The air is smoky with hearth fires and damp straw. You hear the low calls of cattle beyond a fence of branches. A dog noses through ashes near a doorway. The ground is packed hard beneath your feet, polished by many seasons of walking from hut to field, from field to water, from water back again. In this settled world, salt becomes more than a lucky taste. It becomes a regular need that must be found, remembered, gathered, and carried. Farming changes the human relationship with salt because diets change. Hunter-gatherers often get sodium from animal foods, especially blood and meat. Early farmers may rely more heavily on grains, pulses, and vegetables, which can be filling, dependable, and frankly a little dull without help. A bowl of boiled grain may keep you alive, but salt whispers, "Perhaps we can do better than warm paste." And just like that, a mineral begins to matter in daily cooking. Animals need salt too. Domesticated cattle, sheep, goats, and pigs require minerals, especially when they're kept away from wide natural ranges. You stand near a pen and feel rough wool brush your hand as sheep crowd toward a trough. Their breath is grassy and warm. A herder places a chunk of salty earth nearby, and the animals lick it with calm determination. The scene is ordinary, but it is one of the foundations of pastoral life. Salt supports herds, and herds support people. Across Neolithic landscapes, salt sources become precious points of return. Some communities visit salty springs where brine bubbles from the ground with a faint mineral smell. Others gather salt from marshes or dried lake beds, where the earth crunches underfoot and glitters in the sun. In mountain regions, people seek exposed rock salt, striking it with stone tools or digging shallow pits. The work is slow, grainy, and tiring. Your fingers sting from tiny cuts. Salt gets into every scrape, because apparently survival also enjoys being annoying. A mainstream historical fact settles here like dust on pottery. Some of Europe's earliest known salt production sites date back to the Neolithic period. Archaeologists have found evidence of people boiling brine in clay vessels, leaving behind broken pottery, hearths, and salty residues. These remains show that salt was not merely picked up when convenient. It was processed with intention. People invested fuel, labour, and time in transforming salty water into portable crystals. You crouch beside a row of clay containers near a fire. Brine simmers inside them, cloudy and hot. Steam rises into the cold morning, carrying a sharp smell that catches the back of your throat. Children keep away from the fire because clay can crack, water can spit, and adults are already stressed enough by pottery technology. As the water disappears, a crust forms. Someone scrapes it out, presses it together, and lets it dry. The result may be rough, greyish, and mixed with impurities, but it travels better than liquid brine. Travel is the key. Salt paths begin not as roads, but as repeated choices. One foot follows another through grass, forest, valley, and ridge. A path becomes visible where many bodies have pressed the same line into the earth. People carry salt in baskets, leather bags, bark containers, or pottery. They exchange it for stone tools, shells, hides, grain, pigments, or marriage gifts. The mineral becomes a quiet negotiator between communities. You move along one of these early trails at dusk. The forest smells of resin and wet leaves. Insects hum. A bundle presses against your back, its straps biting into your shoulders. Every step reminds you that valuable things are rarely light. Salt is heavy. It absorbs damp. It breaks apart. It must be protected from rain. Even so, people carry it because it keeps food, feeds animals, flavours meals, and connects households that might otherwise remain strangers. A quirky tidbit appears in the shape of briquetage, the broken clay equipment used in ancient salt making. To modern-eyes, these fragments can look like a giant prehistoric kitchen accident. There are pedestals, troughs, pans, and cracked lumps scattered around the old production sites. For a long time, such debris was not always glamorous. It is not a golden mask or a sword with a dramatic backstory. It is basically the archaeology of salty cookware. Yet these humble pieces reveal organised labour, seasonal work, and knowledge passed from hand to hand. In some places, salt production may have drawn people together for gatherings that were part work, part exchange, and part social festival. Imagine families arriving from different valleys, Fires burn for days. Brine boils. Meat smokes. News travels faster than usual. Someone admires someone else's bracelet. Someone complains that their cousin never helps carry wood. Trade happens, but so does gossip, alliance, courtship, and the delicate art of pretending not to notice who brought the best pot. Scholars continue to debate how centralised early salt production really was. Some argue that certain sites suggest organised communal work, perhaps controlled by emerging leaders. Others think many households or small groups produce salt seasonally without strong hierarchy. The uncertainty matters because salt sits near the beginning of a larger question. When do useful resources become sources of power? At what point does a shared spring become someone's property? When does a path become a toll road in someone's imagination? You can feel that question in the atmosphere around a salt spring. The ground is muddy and pale, reeds whisper in the wind. People take turns filling vessels, but the place itself invites rules. Who gathers first? Who may return? Who protects the source? Who decides how much is fair? Even without writing, communities remember agreements. They mark seasons. They tell stories. A salt place becomes not merely a location, but a social memory. As evening closes, you sit near a hearth in a farming village. A pot of grain and greens steams gently. A pinch of salt changes the meal. It is not much, just enough to lift the flavour from flat to comforting. Outside, animals shift in their pens. The walls smell of clay, smoke, and stored harvest. Somewhere in the dark, a path leads away toward a marsh, a spring, a lake bed, a distant shining crust. People will walk it again when the stores run low. In this settled world, salt teaches humans a new rhythm. It belongs to the body, the herd, the kitchen, and the road. It encourages memory, movement, exchange, and obligation. It is still small enough to fit in your hand, yet large enough to pull communities across landscapes. The first salt paths are not just lines on the ground. They are the early threads of trade, tying hunger to skill, place to people, and survival to the patient work of carrying what the earth gives. You arrive in ancient China beside a valley where the ground seems to breathe salt. Mist hangs low over the fields, and the morning air carries the smell of wet soil. Wood smoke, and something sharper beneath it, a mineral tang rising from hidden brine. The soundscape is soft but busy bamboo creaks. Water sloshes in clay jars. A rooster announces himself with unnecessary confidence, and somewhere a worker coughs beside a smoky furnace. Here, salt is not simply found, yes, it is engineered. You stand near a brine well, watching people lower containers into the earth. The well mouth is dark, framed by packed clay and timber. Ropes rasp against wood. Hands pull steadily, palms calloused and shiny from labour. When the vessel comes up, it carries water that looks ordinary, almost disappointing, until someone dips a finger, touches it to the tongue, and nods. The earth below is holding a buried sea. China's relationship with salt reaches deep into antiquity. In several regions, especially in places such as Sichuan, people learned to draw salty brine from underground sources and boil it until crystals remained. Over time, this became one of the most sophisticated early salt industries in the world. The mainstream historical fact is striking. Ancient Chinese states developed salt as a major government revenue source, and salt administration became tied to state power for many centuries. You can feel why rulers cared. Salt is needed by everyone. Farmers need it. Soldiers need it. Families need it. Animals need it. It cannot be ignored without discomfort, spoilage, and a general decline in dinner quality. A ruler who controls salt does not merely control a luxury. He controls a daily necessity, which is a very efficient way to become unpopular and wealthy at the same time. At the edge of the works, brine is poured into large pans set over fires. Fuel matters. The heat must be steady, and the labour must be constant. Smoke stings your eyes. Steam dampens your face. Your robe clings slightly at the sleeves. The brine thickens as water escapes into the air, and crystals begin to form like pale flakes of frost in a place where no winter has entered. Workers scrape, gather, dry, and pack the salt for transport. The process is slow, but there is patience in it. You hear the scrape of wooden tools along the pan. You smell hot brine, ash, sweat, and damp bamboo. Someone nearby splits kindling. Someone else repairs a carrying basket. No single motion seems grand. Yet together the motions create a mineral empire, one pan at a time. In Sichuan, later salt workers became famous for astonishing drilling techniques. They used bamboo, iron bits, percussion drilling, and long experience to reach deep brine deposits. Some wells eventually reached impressive depths, far beyond what a sleepy traveller might expect from a society without modern machinery. Imagine the sound, a rhythmic thudding, as the drill rises and falls day after day, while workers listen for changes underground. The earth answers slowly. It is not known for being chatty. There is a wonderfully quirky detail in this world of salt and wells. Some Chinese brine wells also released natural gas, and workers learned to pipe that gas through bamboo tubes to fuel boiling fires. So you're standing in a pre-modern industrial landscape, where bamboo pipelines carry gas to salt furnaces, which feels almost suspiciously futuristic. The tubes are simple, organic, and slightly fragile, but they reveal a brilliant habit of practical problem-solving. The earth gives brine and fire, and human hands persuade them to cooperate. You watch a worker check a bamboo pipe with careful attention. The surface is smooth under his fingers, cool in the morning air. A faint hiss may come from a joint. Nearby, flames tremble under an evaporating pan. It is a delicate arrangement, half craft and half risk. Nobody here is using the phrase energy infrastructure, which is merciful, but that is what you are seeing in its early form. Salt also enters Chinese thought as a matter of policy and debate. In ancient courts, officials argued about whether the state should monopolize salt and iron, or leave trade in private hands. These were not dreamy philosophical chats over tea with everyone being charming. They were arguments about revenue, fairness, military funding, corruption, and the reach of government into daily life. Salt made abstract politics very practical. A tax on salt could build armies, maintain borders, support administration, and irritate households trying to season cabbage. Historians continue to debate how ordinary producers experienced these systems at different times. Some records highlight state organization, official oversight, and revenue. Archaeological and local evidence may show more varied patterns, with private labor, regional practices, smuggling, negotiation, and unofficial production living alongside formal control. The uncertainty reminds you that a salt law written in a capital does not always reveal what happened beside a muddy well before sunrise. You move through a market town fed by the salt trade, baskets line the street, pack animals snort and stamp, a vendor weighs salt with practiced hands, the crystals dull white and slightly grey. The marketplace smells of garlic, dried fish, millet cakes, animal dung, rain on wood, and the clean bite of salt. Traders speak in low voices. A child reaches toward a salt bundle and is gently pulled back, because apparently even in antiquity, children are experts at touching the most inconvenient object. Salt moves outward from the wells into kitchens, farms, workshops, and military stores. It seasons vegetables, preserves meat and fish, supports livestock, and becomes part of economic life. Its movement requires roads, boats, porters, contracts, officials, and watchers. It invites record-keeping. It tempts smugglers. It gives governments a reliable source of income because nobody wakes up and decides the body no longer needs sodium. Very rude of biology, but convenient for taxation. The atmosphere around the brine works changes as night falls. Fires glow orange beneath the pans. Steam rises like pale cloth into darkness. The workers' faces shine with heat. Beyond the furnaces, the land quiets. Frogs call from wet places. Bamboo shadows lean across the ground. You hold a small pinch of finished salt, still faintly warm, and it feels both ordinary and astonishing. This is China's brine secret, not just that salt lies underground, but that patient technique can pull wealth from invisible depths. The mineral becomes a bridge between geology and government, between kitchen and court, between the taste on a tongue and the arguments of officials in distant halls. In the hush of the salt yard, you sense a civilization learning to listen below the surface, to lower a line into darkness, and to raise from it the white grain of order, appetite, and power. You drift toward the Nile in the long, gold light of late afternoon, where the river moves with a calm confidence that makes every kingdom beside it seem temporary. Papyrus reeds whisper at the banks. Birds step through the shallows on thin legs. Mud bricks warm under your palm, and the air smells of river water, baked clay, linen, fish, and the faint dry dust blowing in from the desert. Here, salt has a cousin with a strange Egyptian named natron. It is not the same as common table salt. Though the two live near each other in the family of useful white minerals, natron is a naturally occurring mixture rich in sodium carbonate, found in dry lake beds and desert basins. It looks pale, chalky, and unglamorous, which is exactly the sort of thing history likes to disguise as ordinary before making it essential. You crouch beside a crusted deposit and touch it. It feels powdery, gritty, cool, and slightly harsh against your fingertips. In ancient Egypt, natron mattered deeply. It helped clean, dry, preserve, and transform. People used it in washing, in ritual purification, in making certain materials, and most famously in mummification. The mainstream historical fact is unmistakable. Egyptian embalmers used natron to dry out bodies during the mummification process, helping preserve them for burial and the hoped-for journey into eternity. You walk into a workshop where death is being treated not as an ending, but as a complicated administrative process involving linen, resin, prayers, skill, and quite a lot of drying. The room is shaded. The floor is cool beneath your sandals. The smell is layered palm wine, cedar-like resins, beeswax, linen, human sweat, and the mineral dryness of natron. Outside, the river murmurs. Inside, hands move carefully. The Egyptian climate already helps preservation. Desert sand can dry a body naturally, and very early burials showed how dryness could delay decay. But formal mummification turns chance into craft. Natron draws moisture away. It creates a dry environment where the body can last. The process is not rushed. Nothing about eternity appreciates sloppy workmanship. Apparently, you feel the difference between the green river valley and the pale mineral world beyond it. Egypt is a country of contrasts: wet black soil near the Nile, red desert rising beyond cultivation, and white crystals lying in lonely basins under a punishing sun. Salt and natron belong to that borderland. They are gifts of dryness, collected from places where water has vanished and left its memory behind. Food preservation matters here too. Fish from the Nile, meat from livestock, and other foods can be salted or dried for storage and transport. In a land where harvest cycles, flood seasons, and state labour all shape life, preserved food supports workers, travellers, soldiers, and households. You pass a rack of drying fish near the water. The smell is strong, sharp, and honest. Flies hover with professional interest. A worker rubs salt into the flesh, squinting against the sun. It is not poetic to him. It is lunch security. Salt also touches cleanliness. Natron can be used like a cleansing agent, mixed with oils or used to scrub. You imagine washing with a mineral substance that bites slightly at the skin, leaving it dry and clean. In religious life, purity is not only symbolic, it is physical. Priests wash. Temples are maintained. Offerings must be prepared properly. The mineral world becomes part of sacred order, a way to push back against rot, smell, and disorder. There is a quirky tidbit hiding in the bathroom, which is always where history stores some of its best surprises. Egyptians used natron in early tooth cleaning mixtures. A person might rub teeth with mineral powders and other ingredients, chasing a cleaner mouth thousands of years before minty toothpaste commercials began smiling aggressively at everyone. Imagine a noble carefully tending their teeth with a gritty paste, then stepping out with the quiet pride of someone whose breath is only moderately ancient. You move through a household where salt and natron sit among other useful substances. Clay jars stand in a corner, linen hangs from a peg, bread bakes in a domed oven, giving off a warm, yeasty smell. A woman sprinkles salt into food with practiced restraint. Too little, and the meal is flat. Too much, and everyone drinks water all evening while pretending not to judge her. The kitchen is modest, but it holds the same truth as palace and temple minerals shape daily life. In tombs, the meaning grows deeper. Egyptians believed the body mattered in the life beyond death. Preservation was tied to identity, continuity, and the soul's journey. Salt and natron, then, became helpers against time. They slowed the soft collapse of flesh. They allowed a face, a hand, a form to remain recognizable. You stand near painted walls where offerings are shown in bright colours: bread, beer, onions, birds, cattle, lotus flowers. Everything is arranged as if the order can continue forever if enough care is taken. Yet scholars still debate how mummification developed across social classes and regions. Royal and elite burials are better documented and often more elaborate, while ordinary people experienced a wider range of funerary treatment. Some bodies were carefully embalmed, others were preserved more simply by sand, dryness, or modest preparation. The Egyptian relationship with salt-like minerals was not one single practice, but a spectrum shaped by wealth, period, belief, and local custom. Outside, evening deepens, the desert cools quickly, and the warmth leaves the stones. You hear sandals scuff in dust, a donkey bray, a temple chant carried thinly on the air. The Nile reflects the first stars. Somewhere, a boatman ties his craft for the night. Somewhere else, a worker seals a jar of preserved food. In a shaded place, natron continues its quiet work, pulling moisture from what must be kept. You hold a small lump of mineral crust in your hand. It is not beautiful in the way gold is beautiful. Gold glows and demands admiration like a pharaoh entering late to his own ceremony. Natron simply sits there, pale and useful, doing the work. But Egypt understands a truth that many societies will learn in different ways. Preservation is power. To preserve food is to survive hunger. To preserve purity is to serve the gods. To preserve the body is to bargain with eternity. As night settles over the Nile Valley, the smell of river mud mingles with smoke from cooking fires. The salt pans, dry basins, kitchens, temples, and embalming rooms belong to one quiet story. A white mineral drawn from vanished water helps a civilization face the oldest human fear that everything loved will decay. In Egypt, salt does not merely season the meal, it touches the sacred edge between life, memory, and the dream of lasting beyond the dark. You enter the ancient Near East through a doorway of dust, heat, and hospitality. The land is wide and dry in places, green and fertile in others, stitched together by caravan tracks, hill paths, river valleys, and old stone towns where people know the value of water before they know almost anything else. The air smells of baked bread, goat hair, olive oil, warm clay, and the faint mineral breath of salt carried in sacks from distant flats or inland springs. Here, salt is not only something you taste, it is something you swear by. You sit beneath the shade of a woven awning while a host tears bread and places food before you. A small dish of salt rests nearby. It is not elegant by modern standards, just pale crystals in a rough container, but it carries a social weight far heavier than it looks. Sharing salt with someone can mean more than sharing flavour. It can mean peace, welcome, trust, and obligation. You're not merely eating in another person's tent or courtyard. You're stepping into a relationship. Across the ancient Near East, salt appears in customs of hospitality, sacrifice, and covenant. In biblical tradition, salt is linked with permanence and sacred agreement. The phrase covenant of salt suggests durability, loyalty, and preservation. Salt does not rot. Salt resists decay. Salt makes food last, so naturally. People reach for it when they want to speak about promises that should not dissolve the moment everyone gets uncomfortable. You can imagine the scene in a household at dusk. A lamp burns low, its flame wavering in a shallow bowl of oil. Bread sits on a reed mat. The walls hold the day's warmth. Someone sprinkles salt over lentils, and the whole meal wakes slightly. Outside, animals shift in the yard, bells clinking softly at their necks. The taste is simple, but the gesture is old. Salt at the table says you are received here, and at least for tonight, nobody is pretending you're a stranger. The mainstream historical fact is clear salt held ritual importance in ancient Israelite practice, including its use with offerings. Some biblical laws describe offerings being seasoned with salt, connecting the mineral to worship, purity, and lasting obligation. The sacred table and the household table are not as separate as modern minds may imagine. Both involve food, both involve order, both involve the careful handling of gifts. You walk toward a sanctuary where smoke rises in the morning light. The smell is powerful roasted grain, animal fat, incense, ash, and salt. Priests move with learned precision. Every action has meaning, and every substance carries a kind of language. Salt belongs among materials that help make an offering complete. It is small, but it says something important. It says the gift should endure in memory. It says the relationship between human and divine is not casual, not temporary, not a quick little arrangement made only when the crops look nervous. Salt also appears in images of judgment, in stories of ruined cities and punished lands. Salt can mark barrenness. A field sown with salt becomes a symbol of desolation, whether as literal practice, poetic exaggeration, or both. The same mineral that preserves food can also represent land where nothing grows. This is one of salt's strange powers in human imagination. It can mean life, loyalty, and hospitality, then turn around and mean emptiness, dryness, and the end of hope. Very dramatic for something that sits quietly beside the soup. One famous story speaks of a woman turned into a pillar of salt after looking back toward destruction. Whether heard as theology, warning, folklore, or moral drama, it shows how salt became part of the symbolic landscape. Around the Dead Sea, where mineral deposits, salt formations, and harsh terrain shape the view, such imagery feels almost natural. The land itself seems capable of telling stories in white crusts and bitter water. You stand near the Dead Sea at the edge of evening. The air is heavy and still. The water lies dark and dense, reflecting the sky with an almost oily calm. Salt crystals crackle underfoot. The smell is mineral, sharp, and slightly sulphurous in places. Nothing about the scene feels soft, yet it is beautiful in a severe way. You dip your fingers into the water and feel how slick it is, how it clings to the skin. This is not a friendly little pond. This is a landscape with boundaries. A quirky tidbit rises from the dining mat rather than the temple. In some later traditions of the region, bread and salt became symbols of friendship so strong that betraying someone after eating their salt was treated as shameful. The idea appears in different cultures around the Eastern Mediterranean and Western Asia. To eat another person's salt was to accept a bond. Imagine trying to leave a tense family dinner and being told, "You had the salt, so now you are morally involved." Ancient etiquette did not play around. Salt also moves through law and economy. Communities must obtain it from coastal flats, saline lakes, desert deposits, or trade. Caravans carry it alongside incense, textiles, metals, and grain. A small sack of salt can pass through many hands: gatherer, trader, guard, porter, cook, priest, host. Each transfer adds story and cost. Salt becomes a link between ecological zones, desert and town, sea and hill, nomad and farmer. Historians still argue whether certain biblical references to salt describe practical customs exactly as performed. Symbolic language shaped by theology, or later interpretations of older habits. The problem is deliciously human texts preserve meaning, but not always the full texture of daily practice. A line about salt may point to a real ritual, a metaphor everyone understood, a legal formula, or all three at once. History, like stew, often thickens when left alone. You pass through a market where merchants sit cross-legged beside sacks and jars. One man sells dried fish stiff with salt, another offers olives packed in brine. A woman buys a small measure for her household, testing its grit between her fingers. The noise is gentle but constant bargaining voices, donkey hooves, clay jars knocking together, children laughing near a wall, the smell of cumin, sweat, dates, dust, and salted food folds into the warm air. In this world, salt becomes a teacher of seriousness. A promise should not spoil. A guest should not be betrayed. An offering should be complete. A land without fertility is a warning. A meal is not only a meal when it binds people to one another. You begin to understand why such a small substance gathers such large meanings. Salt touches the tongue, but it also touches trust. Night comes quietly. Stars appear above the flat roofs and tent lines. A host pushes the salt dish a little closer to you, and the gesture feels older than speech. You taste bread, oil, herbs, and the clean brightness of mineral grains. Somewhere beyond the settlement, caravans move by moonlight. Somewhere near a shrine, smoke thins into the dark. Salt rests between hunger and holiness, between welcome and warning, between the fragile human word and the longing for promises that last. You walk down toward a Greek shoreline where the morning is bright enough to make every white stone look personally pleased with itself. The sea lies blue and restless, breathing against the rocks. Gulls call overhead, nets dry on wooden frames. The air smells of salt water, fish, olive oil, thyme, smoke, and sun-warmed rope. Under your sandals, sand gives way to pebbles, then to the smooth, flat edges of a coastal salt pan. Here, salt belongs to wind, sea, and appetite. In the Greek world, geography makes the sea unavoidable. Coastlines fold into bays and islands, harbours become meeting places, fishing boats return at dawn with their cargo shining silver in baskets. Salt gathers naturally in shallow pools where seawater is trapped and dried by sun. People also make it deliberately by guiding seawater into prepared flats, waiting through the heat, then scraping the crystallized harvest from the bottom. It is slow work, but at least the sun is doing some of the labour, which is considerate of it for once. You stand beside a salt worker bending with a wooden rake. The crystals rasp against the pan floor with a dry whisper. His hands are cracked, his shoulders browned by weather. The salt is damp and heavy at first, clumping in uneven piles. When you touch it, it feels sharp, cool, and grainy, as though the sea is broken into tiny pieces. Nearby, baskets wait to be filled and carried inland. A mainstream historical fact settles naturally into this scene. The ancient Mediterranean depended heavily on salted fish, and fish sauces as traded foods. Greeks and later Romans consumed and exported preserved fish products across wide networks. Salt made fish durable enough to travel beyond the harbour. Without it, the catch was a race against heat, flies, and time is famously undefeated unless salt is invited. You visit a fish-curing yard. The smell arrives before the sight. It is powerful, briny, oily, and not exactly shy. Men and women clean fish, pack them in layers of salt, and set them in jars or vats. Small fish may be dried whole. Larger ones are cut and stacked. The work is slippery and practical. Knives flash. Brine drips. Cats behave as if they are official inspectors. Everyone pretends not to notice that the cats are deeply corrupt. Salted fish feed sailors, soldiers, labourers, and households far from the coast. It travels in amphorae, those pointed clay jars that look elegant until you realise they cannot stand upright without help. They are designed for storage in sand, racks, or ship holds, nested tightly together like ceramic passengers with no legroom. Inside them, preserved foods move across the sea fish, olives, oil, wine, and sauces with names and odours that could fill a room before anyone opens the lid. Greek food culture is rich with the simple things that become extraordinary when handled well. Bread, olives, cheese, wine, herbs, legumes, fish, and salt. You sit near a small table as someone places olives in brine, pressing them beneath liquid so bitterness softens over time. A bowl of cheese sits nearby, crumbly and tangy. Salt helps draw moisture, shape texture, and guard against spoilage. It turns milk into something that can wait. It turns harvest into storage. It turns the abundance of 1 week into food for a leaner day. The coast is alive with trade. You hear oars knocking against hulls, sailors calling, baskets scraping on stone, and the creak of carts moving away from the harbour. A merchant tests a shipment of salt between thumb and finger, suspicious in the way merchants have been suspicious since the invention of other people. Quality matters. Salt may be clean or bitter, white or grey, dry or damp, fine or coarse. Bad salt can spoil work. Good salt can preserve a whole season's catch. A quirky tidbit swims in from the world of fish sauce. The Greeks had gyros, a fermented fish sauce that later became famous in Roman form as garum. It was made from fish parts, salt, and thyme. Quite a lot of thyme. To modern ears, fermented fish liquid may sound like something you discover accidentally and then apologise to the neighbours for. Yet it was prized as a seasoning, adding depth and savour to meals. Its success reminds you that many beloved foods begin as someone's brave decision not to throw something away immediately. Salt also enters medicine and thought. Greek physicians and writers discussed diet, balance, and the qualities of foods. Salt could be cleansing, drying, stimulating, or excessive, depending on context. In a world where health was often understood through balance and bodily humours, salt's strong taste and drying power made it meaningful. You can imagine a physician recommending moderation with the grave expression of a man who knows perfectly well that nobody listens at dinner. Historians still debate how evenly salt access and salted products were distributed across Greek society. Elite texts mention refined dining and imported goods, but ordinary households leave fewer voices behind. Archaeology gives amphorae, fish bones, salting installations, and trade patterns. Yet the daily pinch in a poor kitchen is harder to see. The uncertainty is not empty. It asks whether salt was mostly abundant along coasts, more costly inland, or deeply shaped by local sources and seasonal trade. You climb a little above the harbour toward a town of stone houses and narrow lanes. The sun warms plaster walls. A pot simmers near a doorway, giving off the comforting scent of lentils, onions, herbs, and salt. Children run past with dusty feet. A woman lifts fish from a jar and rinses away excess brine. The meal is humble, but the sea sits inside it, carried there by salt. In public life, salt hides behind bigger words like commerce, colonization, and maritime power. Greek settlements spread across the Mediterranean and Black Sea, often near good harbours, fisheries, farmland, or trade routes. Salted fish and preserved foods become part of that movement. They help feed voyages. They allow surplus to become exchange. They connect island to mainland, coast to interior, fisher to farmer, and household to market. Even the landscape seems to teach this lesson. Salt pans shine at the edges of the sea, flat and bright beneath the afternoon sky. Fish hang from racks, olives soak in jars, sailcloth snaps in the breeze. The air touches your lips and leaves a mineral taste. Everything is in motion, yet everything depends on preservation. Ships travel because food can travel. Markets grow because goods can wait. A city eats because someone scraped crystals from the shore and packed fish before the heat ruined them. As evening gathers, the harbour softens. Oars rest, ropes go slack, smoke rises from cooking fires, and the smell of salted fish mingles with bread and wine. You sit where waves tap stone steps with small, repeated sounds. In the Greek world, salt is not yet the grand tyrant of taxation or the lonely treasure of deserts. It is coastal craft, market habit, pantry wisdom, and the flavour of a sea-shaped civilization. The crystal is bright on your tongue, carrying sunlight, labour, and the patient blue breath of the Mediterranean. You step onto an old Roman road while the morning is still cool, and the stones beneath your sandals hold the night like a memory. The surface is uneven but deliberate, fitted and firm, stretching away through low hills, fields, and scrubby pasture. A mule snorts behind you. Cartwheels grind. Somewhere ahead, a soldier laughs too loudly at his own joke, proving that empires may rise and fall. But that particular human habit is eternal. This is the world of Rome, where salt becomes road, ration, trade, and statecraft. The air smells of dust, leather, crushed herbs, animal sweat, and distant cooking fires. You pass a milestone, weathered and solemn. It does not care that your feet hurt. Roads like this bind the Roman world together, carrying armies, officials, merchants, letters, pottery, oil, wine, grain, and salt. One of the famous Roman roads, the Via Salaria, takes its name from salt. It connected Rome with salt-producing areas toward the Adriatic side of central Italy, and its very name preserves the memory of a mineral moving through the landscape. You can imagine earlier villagers and herders using paths long before Roman engineers improved them. Then Rome, being Rome, looks at useful movement and thinks, could this be straighter, more controlled, and somehow taxable? The road becomes part of a larger system. Salt travels inward, goods travel outward, soldiers march, administrators count things. Everyone is very impressed with order until they are the ones being counted. The mainstream historical fact here is sturdy salt was essential in the Roman economy for preserving food, seasoning meals, supporting livestock, and supplying armies. Roman expansion required logistics, and logistics is the unromantic art of making sure people with spears do not get hungry. Salted meat, salted fish, olives in brine, cheese, and preserved foods helped feed military units and urban populations. Glory gets statues, supply chains get sawbacks. You walk beside a small military party on the road. Their sandals slap stone, metal fittings clink softly. The men carry packs that seem designed by someone with a grudge against shoulders. In their food supplies are items that can survive travel better than fresh meat or fish. Salt is not glamorous, but it lets a camp exist beyond the nearest market. It stretches distance. It buys time. It keeps an army from becoming a very armed group of hungry complainers. There is an old popular idea that Roman soldiers were paid in salt, or that the word salary comes directly from salt payments. The truth is more careful. The Latin word salarium is connected with salt, but scholars debate exactly how the connection worked. It may have referred to money given for purchasing salt or provisions, rather than literal wages paid as bags of salt. Still, the association is powerful because it reveals how closely salt and value sat together in Roman thought. Even if nobody was lining up on payday to receive a crunchy little paycheck, salt stood near the idea of necessary compensation. A quirky tidbit steps in wearing sandals. Roman writers use salt as a metaphor for wit. A person with sal could be sharp, lively, and amusing. So in Rome, salt seasoned both food and conversation. You can almost hear a dinner guest deliver a clever remark, then glance around to make sure people noticed. Some things never change. A bland stew is unfortunate. A bland guest may be worse. You enter Rome itself, or at least the hungry idea of it. The city is loud, dense, and fragrant in ways both inviting and alarming. Bakers pull bread from ovens. Vendors shout. Donkeys object to their life choices. Apartment buildings rise over narrow streets. From a shop front comes the smell of garum, fish sauce, salty and intense, mixed with smoke, wine, onions, and humanity packed a little too closely together. Salt sits in every part of this urban appetite. It flavours porridges, vegetables, fish, and meats. It helps make cheese. It preserves olives. It supports the fish sauces beloved across the Roman world. Not every household eats the same way. The wealthy recline with imported delicacies and dramatic serving dishes. The poor rely on bread, pulses, vegetables, and whatever small salty flavour can make the meal feel less like punishment from the grain gods. Salt is democratic in need, but unequal in quality and access. You pass warehouses near a river port. Amphorae stand stacked in careful rows. Some contain salted fish products from Spain or North Africa. Others hold oil or wine. Workers lift, roll, tie, mark, and curse quietly when something breaks. The clay is rough under your hand, cool in the shade. A merchant checks seals, calculates loss, and develops the facial expression of a man who suspects everyone is cheating him, which, to be fair, may not be entirely wrong. Rome's salt production drew from coastal salt pans, especially around places where seawater could be evaporated in shallow basins. The sun, wind, and labour work together. Salt could also come from inland sources across the empire. As Rome expanded, it absorbed landscapes of salt mines, springs, marshes, flats, and trading centres. The empire did not invent salt trade, but it folded salt into a vast administrative and commercial world. Historians still argue whether Roman state control over salt was consistently strong or varied widely by region and period. Some evidence points to public interest, regulation, and strategic concern. Other evidence suggests private enterprise, local production, and market exchange remained important. Like many Roman things, the neat image of a single imperial system becomes messier when you step closer. The empire was not one machine. It was many arrangements tied together by roads, law, force, habit, and paperwork that probably annoyed everyone involved. You leave the city and approach a coastal salt pan at sunset. The flats glow pink and silver. Water lies in shallow rectangles reflecting the sky. Workers rake crystals into ridges that sparkle faintly as the light fades. The sound is dry and soft, like sand dragged over stone. Your skin feels sticky from sea air. Salt gathers on lips, clothing, tools, and hands. It is everywhere, yet it must still be gathered one back-breaking load at a time. In this Roman world, salt reveals the hidden structure behind power. The empire is not only marble, law, conquest, and senators making speeches as if they personally invented seriousness. It is also preservation, transport, storage, and food that survives the road. Salt allows fish to travel from shore to city, soldiers to march farther, herds to remain useful, and markets to widen their reach. It is a crystal of movement. Night settles along the road. A cart creaks past, carrying sacks and jars toward another town. The driver's cloak smells of wool and dust. Stars appear above the dark line of hills. Somewhere, a cook sprinkles salt into a pot for tired workers. Somewhere, a soldier eats preserved rations beside a watchfire. Somewhere, an official records goods moving along a route named for the mineral itself. You stand in the quiet after the wheels pass, feeling the old stones under your feet. Rome's greatness often announces itself in monuments, but salt speaks in smaller sounds: the scrape of a rake, the clink of amphorae, the crunch of a ration, the steady footfall on a road. The mineral does not need to shine like gold. It travels farther, feeds more mouths, and rests at the centre of an empire that learned, with impressive confidence, that power depends on keeping people supplied, seasoned, and just salty enough to continue. You enter the medieval world through a gate of timber and iron, where the road narrows, the air cools, and a castle watches from its hill like a stone animal pretending to sleep. Below it, fields lie in strips. Smoke lifts from thatched roofs. Crows argue over a dung heap with the confidence of tiny judges. The whole village smells of damp wool, wood smoke, straw, ale, livestock, and the sour promise of winter waiting beyond the harvest. Here, salt becomes a matter of survival under watchful walls. The castle is not merely a dramatic backdrop for knights making poor romantic decisions. It is a centre of control. Land, labour, mills, ovens, forests, roads, markets, and sometimes salt all fall under networks of rights and obligations. A lord may claim dues on trade, charge fees for using facilities, or profit from nearby resources. Salt, because everyone needs it, and nobody can grow it in a field like turnips, is especially tempting to anyone who enjoys collecting payments with a straight face. You walk through a village yard where a woman opens a wooden chest and lifts out a precious store of salted pork. The meat is firm, darkened, and fragrant with smoke. It has the dense, oily smell of preserved fat, sharp salt, and hearth soot. Her fingers are reddened from cold water and work. She cuts carefully, because this is not food to waste. It must stretch through weeks when the ground is hard. The hens are sulking, and fresh meat is a rare guest. A mainstream historical fact sits at the centre of medieval life. Salt was vital for preserving food before refrigeration. Meat, fish, butter, cheese, and vegetables could be salted, brined, or cured, helping households survive seasonal shortages. Winter is not romantic when your pantry is empty. Snow looks lovely only if there is something edible behind the door. You step into a smoke-darkened room. Hams hang from beams. A barrel of brine stands in the corner. The floor is packed earth, cold through thin shoes. The fire whispers and snaps. A child turns a crust of bread in both hands, watching steam rise from a pot. Salt has entered this room as protection against hunger. It keeps pork from spoiling, strengthens cheese, preserves fish, and gives rough meals a little brightness. The smallest pinch may be guarded like a private treasure. In coastal regions, salt pans keep working with tides and sun. In inland regions, the story goes underground. Medieval Europe is full of salt towns, salt springs, and salt mines that grow wealthy because geology has been generous in highly specific places. Names like Salzburg, meaning salt fortress, or salt town in a broad sense, point toward this importance. Hallstatt and other alpine areas are famous for deep traditions of salt mining. The mineral lies in mountains as if the sea had once hidden itself in stone and waited for humans to become sufficiently stubborn. You descend into a mine in imagination. The daylight shrinks behind you. The air becomes cooler, closer, and faintly bitter. Torches smoke against the ceiling. Every footstep echoes. The walls glitter in patches where rock salt catches the flame. Pink, grey, white, and amber. Your hand touches the wall, and it feels dry, hard, and strangely warm from the work of bodies nearby. Miners swing picks, wedge tools, haul baskets, and breathe dust. Their labour is slow, dangerous, and absolutely necessary. The sound underground is unlike the village. No birds, no cattle, only the chip of iron, the scrape of sledges, the creak of supports, and human breathing. A miner might know the mountain by sound and crack, trusting experience more than comfort. Rock can shift, water can seep, tunnels can fail. Salt wealth is stored in darkness, and darkness always charges interest. A quirky tidbit from the medieval salt world comes from the mines themselves. In some alpine salt mines, preserved ancient materials have survived because salt can help protect organic matter from decay. Archaeologists have found old tools, textiles, and even traces of food in salt mining environments from earlier periods. It is as if the mountain keeps a slightly odd memory box and refuses to throw anything away. Salt preserves meat in kitchens, yes, but sometimes it also preserves history's lost laundry. Medieval salt towns often become busy, regulated places. You pass through a market street where pack horses carry sacks. Bells ring from a church tower. A clerk scratches marks into a tablet or parchment, recording quantities, dues, and permissions. Merchants test the quality of salt, complain about dampness, argue over measures, and somehow all look offended at the same time. Salt may be sold in cakes, loose crystals, or measured loads. Its price can change with season, distance, war, weather, and the mood of authorities, which is never ideal. The church also has a relationship with salt. Salt appears in rites, blessings, and symbolism in Christian practice, associated with purity, wisdom, and protection. In some traditions, blessed salt is used in baptismal or protective contexts. The mineral's ancient meanings continue in new language. It resists corruption. It flavors the bland. It preserves what would decay. For a preacher, that is almost too convenient. You can practically hear the sermon writing itself. Historians still argue about how much control feudal lords had over local salt compared with towns, monasteries, royal authorities, or merchant groups. The answer shifts by region. In some places, rulers or bishops held strong rights over production and trade. In others, urban guilds, private producers, or negotiated privileges shaped the business. Medieval Europe is not one tidy system. It is a patchwork quilt sewn by lawyers, monks, warriors, and merchants who all insist their corner is the most legitimate. You stand beside a monastery kitchen where brothers prepare fish for fasting days. The smell is briny and smoky. Barrels line the wall. Salted herring, cod, or other preserved fish can feed communities when meat is restricted or fresh supplies are scarce. The texture is tough, the flavour strong, but it is dependable. Dependable food has a quiet holiness of its own when the weather turns cruel. Beyond the monastery, beyond the village, beyond the castle ditch, salt travels. It moves on pack animals through mountain passes, by cart over muddy roads, by boat along rivers. Every mile adds cost. Every bridge may add a toll. Every lord with a tower may suddenly discover a passionate interest in transit fees. Salt becomes more expensive as it moves inland, and the poor feel that difference at the table. Night gathers over the castle hill. The walls fade into a black shape against the sky. In the village, doors close. A pot bubbles softly. Someone adds a little salted meat, and the room fills with a richer smell, smoky and comforting. Outside, frost begins to silver the ground. The pantry matters now. The barrel matters. The small store of salt matters. In this medieval world, salt lives under authority but also under necessity. It is counted by clerks, taxed by lords, blessed by priests, mined by workers, carried by traders, and cherished by households trying to last through the cold months. Stone castles may look like power, but power is also a barrel in the corner, a ham in the rafters, a road through the hills, and the pale mineral that keeps hunger waiting a little farther from the door. You arrive in the north where the air feels colder, wetter, and slightly suspicious of comfort. A grey sea pushes against the docks, lifting ships with slow, heavy breaths. Ropes creak, wooden hulls knock against pilings, gulls scream above barrels, nets, crates, and men in wool caps who look as if they were personally carved from bad weather. The smell is immediate tar, damp timber, fish, smoke, wet wool, spilled beer, horse dung, and salt. Not a delicate kitchen salt, politely waiting in a bowl. This is working salt, packed into barrels, clinging to fish, crusted on sleeves, buried in trade accounts, and carried through towns where everyone seems busy, cold, and convinced that business could be better. You walk into the world of the Hanseatic League, a loose but powerful network of merchant towns that stretched across northern Europe. It was not an empire with one crown or one capital. It was more like a determined club of traders, ships, privileges, warehouses, and agreements, held together by profit, law, habit, and the shared belief that someone else should pay the higher fee. Salt sits near the heart of this northern system because fish sits near the heart of northern appetite. In the Baltic and North Sea worlds, herring becomes one of the great preserved foods of the Middle Ages. The mainstream historical fact is clear. Salted herring was a major trade good, and preserving it allowed fish caught in huge seasonal quantities to feed inland populations, towns, monasteries, and markets far from the coast. You stand beside workers at a curing yard. The morning is raw, your fingers stiffen in the cold, fish arrive in shining heaps, silver bodies flashing like coins poured from a net. Women and men gut, sort, rinse, salt, and barrel them with a speed that comes from practice and necessity. The sound is wet and rhythmic, knives scraping, fish thudding into tubs, salt spilling, barrel hoops being hammered tight. Brine runs between the boards beneath your feet. The salt itself often travels from famous production centres. One of the great names is Lüneburg, a German town rich from brine springs and salt works. Its salt helped preserve fish in places such as Scania, where medieval herring fisheries could be enormous. From there, barrels moved through Hanseatic trade routes towards cities and tables across northern and central Europe. A fish caught in cold water might end up feeding someone hundreds of miles away, which is impressive for an animal with no travel ambitions. You follow a wagon inland toward Lüneburg. The road is muddy, rutted, and deeply committed to making ankles miserable. Forest presses close in places. The air smells of pine resin, damp leaves, and tired animals. At the town, smoke rises from salt-boiling houses. Brine is heated in pans until crystals form, and the work consumes fuel in hungry quantities. Salt production is not just mineral labour, it is also forest labour, transport labour, and the constant question of where the next load of wood comes from. This creates a quieter environmental story. Salt works need heat. Heat needs fuel. Fuel often means trees. Around some medieval salt towns, woodland management becomes a serious concern because boiling brine can devour timber faster than a town would like to admit. The landscape changes not only through castles and fields, but through furnaces breathing day after day, turning wood and brine into trade. A quirky tidbit belongs to the herring fairs of Scania. These seasonal gatherings could become huge temporary marketplaces, crowded with fishers, merchants, coopers, salt sellers, cooks, servants, clerks, and probably more people complaining about prices than any one coastline deserves. Imagine the smell of thousands of herring being processed at once. It is not exactly a perfume for dreamers, unless the dreamer is a very ambitious cat. You move through a Hanseatic counting house, where the atmosphere changes from wet docks to dry calculation. The room smells of wax, parchment, wool, and ink. A merchant bends over records, noting barrels, weights, debts, ship space, losses, and promises. Salt and fish become numbers as well as food. Trade depends on trust, but also on records, seals, witnesses, and the charming assumption that trust is better when backed by penalties, the Hanseatic League grows powerful through privileges in foreign ports in places like London, Bruges, Bergen and Novgorod. Hanseatic merchants secure trading rights, warehouses and legal protections, salted fish, wax, timber, grain, furs, cloth, metal goods, and many other products move through these networks. Salt is only one piece, but it is the piece that lets perishable abundance become durable wealth. Historians still argue how unified the Hanseatic League truly was. Some describe it as a remarkably effective commercial alliance, able to defend privileges and shape northern trade. Others emphasize its loose structure, regional rivalries, uneven cooperation, and the independence of individual towns. The uncertainty matters because the League was not a neat modern company or nation. It was a web, and webs hold because many threads pull at once. You step aboard a cog, a broad-bellied ship built for cargo rather than elegance. The deck is damp beneath your boots. Sailcloth snaps. The hold smells of barrels, stale water, wood, and salt fish packed tight for travel. This is not a romantic vessel gliding silently into legend. It groans, leaks, rolls, and depends on sailors who understand wind, shoals, storms, and the deeply unfair personality of the sea. At night in a port town, tavern windows glow amber through mist. A bowl of stew arrives, thick with onions, cabbage, grain, and a piece of salted herring. The taste is strong, briny, and comforting in a stern northern way. Outside, the harbour breathes. Inside, merchants murmur over accounts while sailors dry their sleeves near the fire. In this world, salt does not glitter in royal treasure rooms. It moves in barrels, stains fingers, feeds fasting days, enriches towns, and gives merchants reason to cross dangerous waters. The Hanseatic salt trade is a story of cold seas and warm ledgers, of fish made durable, of brine towns and harbour cranes, of ordinary hunger organised into extraordinary commerce. You listen to the creak of ships in the dark and taste the mineral edge of the north, sharp, practical, and quietly powerful. You glide into Venice on water that seems too soft to carry so much ambition. The lagoon spreads silver under a pale sky, broken by low islands, wooden posts, boats, nets, and the distant shapes of domes rising like a dream that has learned accounting. Oars dip quietly, bells sound across the mist. The air smells of seaweed, wet timber, fish, damp stone, tar, and that clean mineral breath that follows the tide wherever it goes. Venice is a city of water, but it is also a city of salt. You step from a boat onto a slick stone landing. The surface is cool under your feet, and the canal beside you laps gently against steps worn by centuries of arrivals. Traders speak in many accents. Porters carry sacks. A clerk watches with narrowed eyes, already measuring the world in fees. Venice is beautiful, yes, but never forget behind the shimmer stands a republic that knows how to turn mud, tide, and paperwork into power. Salt pans lie across the lagoon and nearby coastal zones where seawater can be trapped, evaporated, and harvested. The work begins with patience. Shallow basins catch the brine. Sun and wind draw away the water. Crystals gather in pale sheets. Workers rake them into piles, their tools scraping softly through the heat. When you touch the salt, it is damp, rough, and bright, like the lagoon itself has broken into grains. The mainstream historical fact is simple and important. Venice built wealth partly through controlling and trading salt, using monopoly rights, taxes, and shipping networks to turn a basic necessity into reliable state income. Salt helped fund the Republic's growth long before glass beads, silk, spices, and dramatic ambassadors made the city famous in popular imagination. Spice may get the perfume. Salt pays the bills. Very Venetian, really. You walk through a government office where salt is no longer a natural crystal but a column of numbers. The room smells of wax, parchment, wool robes, and damp stone. Men bend over ledgers, recording quantities, routes, duties, contracts, and privileges. Their fingers are ink-stained. Their voices stay low. There is no need for shouting when arithmetic can quietly take your money. Venice learned that salt could be used as a tool of policy. The Republic could require certain regions to buy Venetian salt, manage supply, grant contracts, and control resale. These systems changed over time, but the basic principle remained attractive: everyone needs salt, so control of salt creates steady revenue. If a state can profit each time a household preserves fish or seasons soup, the state will probably discover a deep philosophical commitment to salt regulation. You pass into a warehouse near the water. Inside, the air is cooler. Sacks and containers are stacked in careful rows. Salt dust clings to wood and cloth. It dries your lips. It grits softly beneath your fingers. Workers move loads from boat to storage, from storage to market, from market to larger ships. The lagoon is not a barrier. It is a system of watery roads. Boats slide through channels, carrying white mineral wealth toward inland towns and Adriatic trade routes. A quirky tidbit floats in with the tide. Some Venetian officials worried so intensely about salt smuggling that the illegal movement of salt could be treated as a serious offence. Imagine sneaking around marsh paths with contraband seasoning, behaving as if you were carrying royal jewels, when really you have a sack of future soup improvement. Yet to the state, untaxed salt was not harmless. It was stolen revenue. Governments have always had a remarkable talent for feeling personally hurt by uncollected taxes. You follow a narrow lane deeper into the city. Laundry hangs overhead. Water slaps stone below. The smell changes from harbour brine to baking bread. Onions, lamp oil, and human closeness. In a kitchen, fish is rubbed with salt. In a shop, cheese waits in brine. In a tavern, a cook stirs a pot and adds a careful pinch. The same mineral moving through state monopolies also settles into bowls for boatmen, widows, apprentices, monks, and merchants who pretend their digestion is not affected by stress. Venice's power grows from its location and its discipline. The city sits between sea and mainland, between the Adriatic and wider Mediterranean routes, between Europe and Eastern trade. Salt offers one of the earliest lessons in how to manage movement. Ships must be scheduled, goods must be inspected, contracts must be enforced, rivals must be watched. The Republic becomes skilled at turning geography into policy, and policy into income. Historians continue to debate how decisive salt was compared with other sources of Venetian wealth. Some emphasize salt as a crucial foundation of early public finance and regional influence. Others place greater weight on shipping, banking, luxury trade, naval power, and political institutions. The uncertainty is useful. Venice was never made by one thing alone. It was a braid of mud, trade, law, risk, labour, and a talent for making necessity look elegant. You ride out toward the lagoon flats at midday. The light is almost blinding. Water mirrors the sky so completely that up and down feel like they have entered negotiations. Workers stand ankle-deep near the pans. Their skin is browned and wind-worn. Their hands know when the crystals are ready, when the brine is too weak, when rain threatens, when the harvest must be gathered quickly. The atmosphere is open, glittering, and harsh. Venice may sparkle from a distance. But salt work is not velvet and candlelight. It is glare, ache, and salt biting into small cuts. Nearby, birds pick through shallows. The mud smells rich and tidal. A breeze carries the faint ringing of a bell from the city. You realize the lagoon is both fragile and productive. A watery world that demands maintenance. Channels silt, storms rise, islands shift. Salt pans require care, boundaries, and labour. The city's famous beauty rests on a less famous discipline: constant attention to water. In the evening, Venice glows, lamps shimmer along canals, gondolas and cargo boats move through reflections like dark needles pulling thread. A merchant's house receives guests. Silver dishes may appear, perhaps spices too, but salt remains at the table, quiet and necessary. No banquet can escape it. No poor stew can do without it. No government treasury overlooks it for long. You pause by the water as the tide turns. The city breathes through canals, and the lagoon breathes around the city. Somewhere, officials close ledgers. Somewhere, workers cover salt from damp night air. Somewhere, a cook preserves fish for coming days. Venice's salt is not only a product, it is a habit of control, a lesson in patience, a crystal bridge between mudflat and palace. The mineral tastes of sea wind and statecraft. It carries the scrape of rakes across white pans, the whisper of clerks over accounts, the hush of boats moving through narrow canals, and the sharp little truth that wealth does not always begin with jewels. Sometimes it begins with shallow water and sunlight, and a republic clever enough to notice that every mouth in the world needs seasoning. You enter the Sahara at the hour when the sun is still low, before the day becomes a furnace with opinions. The horizon stretches in pale gold and violet. Sand cools beneath your sandals, fine as sifted flour at the surface, firmer where the wind has packed it hard. A camel groans nearby, a sound so magnificently annoyed that you feel it must have been practicing all night. The desert smells almost empty at first. Dry air, leather, dust, animal hair, old sweat, and the faint smoke of a breakfast fire. Then you notice another smell, subtle but present salt packed in slabs, mineral and clean, waiting to be loaded. It does not glitter like treasure, but here it has the gravity of treasure. In a land where distance is dangerous and supplies are life, salt becomes wealth you can stack. You stand near a caravan preparing to leave a salt mining centre. Men wrap cloth around their heads, tighten loads, check water skins, count animals, and mutter about timing. Slabs of salt are cut from desert deposits, often in rough rectangular blocks. They are pale, heavy, and slightly dusty, with edges that scrape the skin when lifted. Each camel kneels with long, suffering dignity as loads are balanced across its back. The ropes creak, bells chime softly. The animals rise, and the whole caravan begins to sway into motion. The mainstream historical fact is clear trans-Saharan trade carried salt southward from desert mines to West African societies, while gold, cola nuts, slaves, textiles, and other goods moved along related routes. Salt from places such as Tagasa and later Taudeni travelled toward market cities including Timbuktu, Gao, and other centres tied to the empires of Ghana, Mali, and Songhai. Gold has the shine, of course. Gold loves attention. But salt feeds bodies, preserves food, and supports animals, which makes it less decorative and far less optional. You walk with the caravan as the sun climbs. At first, conversation travels from rider to rider. A joke passes along the line. Someone hums. A camel sneezes with theatrical force. By midday, the heat presses down like a hand on the back of your neck. The air shimmers, your lips dry. Cloth scratches against your cheeks. The only sounds are soft footfalls, saddle creaks, the clack of wooden frames, and the occasional complaint from a camel who has clearly read none of the motivational literature. Desert travel requires knowledge as valuable as the cargo. Guides read dunes, stars, wind, wells, and memory. A route is not simply a line from one place to another. It is a chain of survival points. Wells may be days apart. A missed water source can mean disaster. The caravan moves by rhythm early travel, rest under punishing heat, careful rationing, night watch, and steady trust in people who know what the sand hides. You touch a salt slab at camp. It is warm from the day, rough against your palm. Small grains flake away. In some places, these slabs can be used almost like currency, valued by weight, distance, and demand. The farther salt travels from its source, the more precious it becomes. A block mined in the desert gathers value with each dangerous mile. It carries not only mineral worth, but the cost of thirst, labour, risk, and the patience of beasts who would rather be doing almost anything else. A quirky tidbit belongs to Tagaza, one of the most famous Saharan salt towns. Medieval travellers described buildings there made partly of salt blocks, because when your local building material is literally salt, you apparently lean into the theme. Imagine resting in a house where the walls are the same substance as the cargo, while hoping rain remains a rumour. The settlement was harsh, remote, and dependent on imported food, yet its salt made it important enough to appear in accounts of long-distance trade. As the caravan moves south, the world changes slowly. The desert does not end like a curtain falling. It thins. Scrub appears. The air carries new smells, dry grass, animal dung, cooking fires, and human settlement. You feel the atmosphere soften. Markets grow nearer. The salt slabs, once part of a silent mineral landscape, become bargaining pieces in human noise. You enter a Sahelian market town alive with voices. Donkeys bray. Traders call out prices. Women balance goods in baskets. Leather workers, grain sellers, metal workers, and scribes share crowded space. Salt blocks are unloaded with careful effort. Their pale surfaces stand out against red earth and dark cloth. Gold dust may be weighed quietly elsewhere, but salt is visible, practical, public. People inspect it, chip it, measure it, discuss it, and probably complain that it was better last season. Markets encourage this spiritual tradition. Salt matters deeply in hot climates, especially where people and animals lose minerals through sweat and labour. It also preserves meat and fish, seasons grain dishes, and supports livestock. In West African trade, salt from the Sahara met agricultural products, forest goods, and gold from farther south. Empires grew around the ability to tax, protect, and profit from these exchanges. Rulers who controlled trade routes gained revenue and prestige. Cities grew rich not by sitting still, but by standing at crossroads. Historians still argue whether salt was literally equal in value to gold in many places, or whether that famous comparison is partly a dramatic shorthand used by travellers and later storytellers. Value changed by location, period, quality, and scarcity. Near a goldfield, gold might be less astonishing than it seems from far away. Near a salt source, salt could be common. Deep inland, a slab of salt could become extremely precious. The truth is not a single exchange rate. It is a moving balance between need and distance. You sit in the shade near the market as evening lowers. A bowl of millet or sorghum porridge is served, and a little salt is added. The taste changes at once, becoming warmer, fuller, more human. Around you, merchants speak of routes, wells, taxes, raids, prices, and rulers. A scholar passes with manuscripts wrapped against dust. A child touches a salt block and licks a finger, then looks solemnly impressed, as if the desert has just explained itself. Night in the Sahel is full of small sounds. Hooves shift, fires crackle, drums pulse somewhere far away. The air smells of smoke, grain, animals, and cooling earth. Above, the stars are enormous. The caravan rests, but the trade continues in memory, in accounts, in agreements, in the plans forming for the next departure. Here, salt is white gold not because it sparkles, but because it moves through danger and arrives as necessity. It links mine to market, desert to savannah, camel driver to king, household pot to imperial treasury. The slab at your feet is heavy, plain, and chipped at the corner, yet it holds sun, thirst, hoofbeats, bargaining voices, and the long patience of people crossing the world's great dry spaces to carry life in mineral form, you move into the Indian subcontinent through heat, colour, and sound, where salt belongs to coast, desert, lake, market, kitchen, temple, and crown. The land is not one salt world, but many. Waves break along longshore lines, dry winds cross western flats, inland lakes glitter in hard sun, markets hum under awnings. Somewhere, a brass pot rings softly as it is set beside a hearth, and the smell of rice, lentils, mustard seed, smoke, and warm ghee rises into the evening air. Here, salt is woven into daily life so completely that it almost disappears. You stand on a western coast at dawn. The Arabian Sea breathes in and out, leaving foam along the sand. Workers guide seawater into shallow pans, where the sun will do its slow work. Their feet sink into wet clay. Their skin shines with sweat and salt spray. Wooden rakes rest nearby, worn smooth by hands. The air tastes sharp on your lips. It carries the cry of birds, the slap of water, and the creak of baskets waiting for harvest. India's long coastline made sea salt production possible in many regions, but inland sources mattered too. Salt lakes, desert deposits, saline soils, and brine wells all contributed to local supply. In Rajasthan, the Sambar Salt Lake became one of the famous inland sources, its wide pale flats shimmering under the sun like a dream that forgot to become water. Around such places, salt was not a rare curiosity. It was labour, livelihood, tax revenue, and household necessity. A mainstream historical fact belongs at the centre of this landscape. Salt was an important source of revenue for many Indian rulers, and later became a major object of British colonial taxation. Long before modern protest made salt politically famous, rulers understood the same uncomfortable truth known across the world when everyone needs something. Taxing it is very tempting. Not kind, perhaps, but tempting. You walk into a village kitchen where the floor is cool packed earth and the walls smell of smoke. A woman stirs lentils in a clay pot. Mustard seeds crackle in hot oil. Turmeric stains a spoon gold. Tamarind gives a sour lift. Then salt enters, small and quiet, and the whole dish becomes complete. Without it, flavours sit apart, polite but distant. With it, they come together. Salt does not shout. It introduces everyone at the table and pretends not to take credit. Salt also plays a role in preservation across India's varied climates. Fish can be salted and dried along the coast. Pickles rely on salt to draw moisture, shape fermentation, and help fruits or vegetables last. Mango, lime, chili, garlic, and many other ingredients meet salt in jars, along with oil and spices. The result is sharp, bright, and powerful, a small spoonful able to wake an entire meal. It is the opposite of sleepy, which is rude for a bedtime story, but historically important. You pass a courtyard where pickle jars sit in the sun, covered with cloth. The smell is intense mustard oil, chili, salt, sour fruit, and heat. Someone turns the pieces with a clean hand or spoon, making sure the salt and spices reach every surface. The jars look humble, but they hold seasonal intelligence. Abundance has been captured and made patient. Rain may come, roads may fail, harvests may vary. The jar waits. In religious and social life, salt carries meanings of purity, hospitality, and protection in different communities. It can be part of everyday offerings, household customs, and ideas about loyalty. In many places, to eat someone's salt means to accept their food and, by extension, a bond of obligation. The expression appears in several languages and traditions. It suggests that salt is not only mineral intake, it is relationship, memory, and duty served with dinner. A quirky tidbit hides in language. In South Asia, phrases connected with salt can express loyalty or betrayal. A person who has eaten another's salt may be expected to show faithfulness, while someone called untrue to salt is accused of ingratitude. So, yes, a seasoning can become a moral witness. Imagine a pinch of salt sitting on the edge of a plate like a tiny judge, saying nothing, remembering everything. You travel across the Rann of Kachch, where white flats spread under a wide sky. The ground crunches beneath your feet. Heat trembles above the surface. In the dry season, salt workers, often from communities with long histories of this labour, scrape, pump, rake, and gather salt under punishing conditions. Their hands burn, their feet crack. Brine stings the skin. The atmosphere is dazzling and severe, beautiful from a distance and demanding up close. Salt here is not romantic. It is work measured in blinding light, aching backs, and careful timing. Brine must concentrate. Crystals must form. Weather must be watched. A sudden rain can ruin effort. Too much sun without water management can harden the pans badly. Production depends on knowledge learned through bodies and seasons, not only through written instruction. Historians still argue about the precise balance between local community control, royal authority, merchant finance, and later colonial regulation in different Indian salt regions. Some sources emphasize state monopoly and taxation. Others reveal small producers, caste and community labor systems, coastal village rights, and private trade networks. India's salt history is not one straight official line. It is a wide field of practice, negotiation, burden, and resilience. You step into a bustling market. Bales of cloth hang in shaded stalls. Spices rise in pyramids of red, yellow, brown, and green. A salt cellar sits beside sacks of coarse crystals. The grains may be white, grey, or pinkish, depending on source and impurities. Buyers pinch, taste, and bargain. Nearby, a potter sells jars. A fish seller fans away flies. A child carries a small packet home, swinging it as if it were treasure, because in a kitchen it is. Salt joins food, health, labour, and rule. It seasons the worker's meal, preserves the fisher's catch, feeds animals, supports trade, enriches rulers, and burdens the poor when taxes rise too high. It is ordinary enough to touch every mouth, yet important enough to attract the attention of kings. That is salt's quiet trick. It hides in plain sight until someone controls it, and then everyone suddenly remembers how necessary it is. Evening settles over a salt lake. The glare fades to rose and violet. Workers move like silhouettes across the flats, rakes balanced on shoulders. The wind smells dry, mineral, and faintly smoky from distant cooking fires. In a nearby home, dinner is served rice, lentils, vegetables, pickle, perhaps fish near the coast, perhaps millet in the dry interior. A pinch of salt is present in all of it, not as luxury, but as completion. You hold a few Indian salt crystals in your palm. They are irregular, rough, and slightly warm from the day. They carry sea wind, desert sun, lake mud, tax records, pickle jars, market voices, and the old promise of shared food. In this land of many climates and many tongues, salt is never just one thing. It is taste, toil, ritual, revenue, and relationship, dissolving into the meal while leaving its history everywhere. You stand on a Japanese shore where the morning tide has just begun to withdraw, leaving the sand dark, smooth, and shining like polished silk. The sea murmurs in long, even breaths. Wind moves through pines along the beach. Somewhere behind you, a hearth fire wakes inside a wooden house, and the air carries the smell of smoke, seaweed, damp rope, fish, and salt spray drying on skin. Here, salt is coaxed from the sea with patience. Japan is a chain of islands surrounded by water, so it may seem obvious that salt would come easily. The sea is right there, rolling in every day like a generous neighbour. But seawater contains only a small amount of salt compared with the water that holds it. To make enough crystals for cooking, preservation, and ritual, people must concentrate the brine. The ocean gives, yes, but it gives in diluted form, because apparently even nature enjoys paperwork. You walk across a salt beach where workers spread seawater over sand. The sand is not merely ground, it is a tool. As the sun and wind dry the surface, salt clings to grains. Workers rake the sand carefully, gathering the salt-rich layer and washing it with seawater to create stronger brine. That brine is then boiled until salt crystallizes. The process is slow, graceful, and laborious, like asking the sea to whisper its minerals into human hands. A mainstream historical fact rests in this coastal rhythm. Traditional Japanese salt-making often used methods that concentrated seawater through sand before boiling the brine. Techniques varied by region and period, but the basic problem remained the same. How do you make weak seawater into strong brine without wasting endless fuel? Sand, sunlight, wind, and careful handling became part of the answer. You bend beside a worker raking the drying sand. The wooden rake leaves fine lines across the beach. The sound is delicate, a soft scratching under the wind. Your fingers touch the sand, and it feels cool below the surface, crusted and gritty above. The worker's sleeves are tied back. His hands are rough, reddened by salt and water. He does not hurry. Hurry would only make the beach laugh at him. Nearby, a brine shed waits with tubs, buckets, and a boiling hearth. Once the salt-rich sand is rinsed, the brine grows stronger. It is poured into iron or clay vessels and heated. Steam rises thickly, dampening beams overhead. The smell is mineral, smoky, and faintly sweet from the wood fire. As the water vanishes, crystals appear. They are not perfect cubes from the modern packet. They are damp, uneven, full of place and weather. Salt in Japan enters food with quiet authority. It preserves fish, seasons vegetables, supports pickles, and helps shape fermented foods. It joins rice, miso, soy sauce, and seafood in the long story of Japanese taste. Salted fish can be dried for storage. Vegetables can be pickled in brine or salt, becoming tsukemono, sharp little companions to a bowl of rice. A meal may look simple, but salt is working behind the curtain like a stagehand who never gets applause. You sit in a small kitchen as rain begins outside. Drops tap the roof in a soft, steady rhythm. A pot warms over the fire. Pickled vegetables are set out in a small dish, crisp and bright. Salt has drawn moisture from them, changed their texture, and helped preserve them. You taste one. It snaps lightly between your teeth, salty, sour, earthy, alive. The room smells of rice steam, miso, smoke, and wet straw. It is a humble comfort, and salt is inside its calm. Salt also belongs to ritual. In Shinto practice, salt is associated with purification. It may be sprinkled or placed at entrances, used in ceremonies, or seen in symbolic acts of cleansing. Sumo wrestlers famously throw salt into the ring as a purifying gesture, a little sparkling storm before bodies collide. It is both sacred and theatrical, which is a combination humans seem to enjoy very much. A quirky tidbit appears outside restaurants and homes, small piles of salt, sometimes called morijiyu, may be placed near entrances for purification or good fortune. They look like tiny white cones, neat and quiet, as if a mountain decided to become polite. The custom has layers of belief and regional variation, but the image is memorable. Salt stands guard without moving. Very efficient security, though admittedly weak against raccoons. The politics of salt in Japan also changes over time. Production methods develop, coastal communities specialize, and authorities recognize salt's economic importance. In later periods, monopolies and regulations shape production and sale. Salt, because it touches every kitchen, always attracts administration sooner or later. One can almost hear officials across history murmuring, "Necessary substance. Excellent. Let us supervise it." Historians still debate the exact origins and spread of some early Japanese salt-making techniques, especially where archaeological evidence is fragmentary. Pottery, hearth remains, coastal sites, and chemical traces offer clues, but they do not always reveal the full rhythm of labour or the people who held the knowledge. Some regions may have relied on simple evaporation, others on sand concentration, others on more complex systems. The shoreline keeps secrets well, washing away evidence with every tide. You walk along the beach at twilight. The salt workers have finished for the day. Tools lean against a shed. The sea has darkened to blue-grey. Your skin feels tight from wind and spray. The sand holds the day's warmth in shallow patches, then cools under the evening air. Pines whisper behind you. Far away, a bell sounds from a temple, soft enough to seem like part of the mist. This Japanese salt world is not built on deep mines or desert caravans. It is built on repetition tide, rake, rinse, boil, dry, store. The work follows weather and season, respecting small differences in wind and sun. Salt comes from the meeting of patience and coastline. It is made by hands that understand that the sea cannot be rushed, only invited. In your palm, the crystals feel damp and delicate. They carry the taste of waves, the scrape of rakes, the warmth of boiling sheds, the snap of pickles, and the quiet purity of ritual. On this shore, salt is not merely harvested. It is listened for, gathered from sand and spray and brought gently into the house, the meal, and the sacred spaces where people ask the world to be clean again. You cross an ocean of time and arrive in the Americas, where salt appears in many landscapes and many hands. It gleams on tropical flats near warm seas. It seeps from springs in forested valleys. It gathers around desert lakes. It hides in mountain basins and animal licks, where deer lower their heads with solemn concentration, as if the earth itself has prepared a quiet meal. The air changes as you move. On a Maya coast, it smells of mangrove mud, warm water, smoke, fish, and wet clay. In the Andes, it smells of high grass, stone, cold wind, and sun-baked salt terraces. Near a North American salt lick, the air holds damp leaves, animal musk, and mineral earth. There is no single American salt story. There are hundreds, each shaped by geography, climate, food, trade, and ceremony. You stand beside shallow salt flats in the Maya world, where seawater and brine can be turned into portable wealth. Workers gather brine, boil it in clay vessels, and produce salt cakes that can be carried inland. The sound is soft and practical water poured into pots, firewood cracking, clay scraping, baskets shifting, people speaking over steam. The heat wraps around your shoulders. Your lips taste the air before you taste the crystals. A mainstream historical fact belongs here. Salt was an important trade good among Maya communities, especially because inland cities needed it for diet and food preservation. Coastal producers could supply salt to people far from the sea, creating exchange networks that connected fishing villages, markets, and urban centres. Salt helped preserve fish and meat, seasoned maize-based meals, and supported the daily needs of large populations. You lift a rough salt cake and feel its weight. It is not as clean or white as modern salt. It may be greyish, uneven, and marked by the container in which it formed, but it is useful, portable, and valuable. It can travel by canoe through waterways or on human backs along paths through forest. It can move with cacao, obsidian, feathers, cotton, shells, and food. Each journey adds value, and each hand that carries it becomes part of the mineral's story. A quirky tidbit rises from underwater archaeology. Some ancient Maya salt works now lie beneath water in coastal Belize, preserved in a way that feels almost dreamlike. Wooden posts and traces of production areas have been found in submerged settings, suggesting once busy salt kitchens where brine was boiled and salt was made. 'Tis a strange thought, a workplace of fire and steam now resting under quiet water. As if the sea came back to reclaim its own seasoning. You move south to the Andes, where the air thins and the mountains stand with immense silence. Terraced salt ponds cling to slopes where a salty spring spills from the earth. The water is guided into shallow pools, where sunlight and dry air leave crystals behind. The ponds form a pale patchwork across reddish earth, each basin edged with clay and stone. You hear trickling water, distant voices, the scrape of tools, and wind moving over the high valley. At places like Maris in the Andean region, salt has been harvested from saline springs for a very long time. The work depends on careful channeling. A small stream of brine is divided into many ponds. Families or groups tend their basins, letting water evaporate, breaking crusts, gathering crystals and repairing edges. Your fingers brush the pond wall. It feels damp, gritty, and fragile. The crystals crunch softly beneath a wooden rake. In the Andes, salt supports foodways built around potatoes, maize, quinoa, dried meat, and preserved goods. It helps with storage in climates where altitude, cold, and dryness already offer preservation advantages. It also travels between ecological zones. Mountain communities, coastal groups, valley farmers, and highland herders exchange what each landscape gives best. Salt becomes part of that vertical world, moving between sea, valley, slope, and plateau. You travel northward into woodland and prairie regions where salt licks draw animals and people alike. Long before written maps, indigenous communities know the places where mineral water rises or salty earth gathers. These sites can become hunting grounds, meeting places, trade points, or landmarks. You hear leaves rustle, insects hum, and the soft movement of animals in the brush. The ground is trampled and damp. The smell is strong, earthy, and animal warm. Salt springs in North America later attract colonists and industries, but their importance did not begin with them. Indigenous peoples used natural salt sources, traded salt, and incorporated mineral places into local knowledge. In some regions, brine could be boiled in pottery or other containers. In others, salt could be scraped from deposits or obtained through exchange. The details vary widely, and that variety matters. The Americas are not one stage with one script. They are a continent of many practices. Historians and archaeologists still debate how far some salt trade networks reached, especially where salt itself dissolves, disappears, or leaves only indirect traces. Pottery, settlement patterns, residue, tools, and trade goods help reconstruct movement. But salt is a tricky witness. It melts into meals, bodies, and soil. It does not always leave dramatic ruins behind. The absence of a glittering salt palace does not mean salt was unimportant. It may simply mean the evidence has quietly washed away. You sit beside a cooking fire in a village as evening deepens. Maize steams in a pot. Fish dries near smoke. A little salt is added to food, and the smell becomes fuller, warmer, more inviting. Children move close to the firelight. Dogs circle hopefully. Someone tells a story while shaping a basket. The atmosphere is calm, but every object near you carries movement: clay from one place, shell from another, stone from a distant source, salt from still another landscape. Salt in the Americas is also ceremonial in some communities, connected with purification, offerings, healing, or restrictions around special practices. These meanings differ from place to place. Some salt sources may be surrounded by stories of origin or guarded by custom. A mineral spring is not only chemistry. It can be a place where the earth speaks in taste, where people learn respect through use. The night becomes quiet. On the Maya coast, the tide rises through mangroves. In the Andes, stars sharpen above white terraces. In northern forests, deer return cautiously to mineral ground. You hold salt from many American worlds in your imagination, each grain shaped by different hands, climates, and needs. Here, salt is never merely a seasoning borrowed from the edge of a plate. It is canoe cargo, mountain harvest, forest memory, market good, preservative, offering, and guidepost. It links sea workers to inland cities, high springs to valley homes, animal trails to human paths. It dissolves quickly on the tongue, yet its roots remain carved into landscapes, carried by people who knew where the earth tasted bright and how to turn that brightness into survival. You step into an age when kingdoms grow heavier. Roads are watched more closely, ports are counted more carefully. Borders become less like vague frontiers and more like lines where someone in a hat would very much like to inspect your cart. The air smells of horse sweat, damp wool, ink, wax seals, and the faint nervousness of people carrying goods through a checkpoint. Salt is still food, medicine, preservation, and habit. But now it is also paperwork. You enter a town gate at dawn with traders waiting ahead of you. Wheels sink into mud. Oxen snort clouds into the cold air. A guard leans on a spear with the sleepy importance of a man who can delay everyone's breakfast. Beside him sits a clerk with a ledger, a knife for cutting seals, and the expression of someone who believes numbers are more trustworthy than human beings. Sacks are opened, measures are checked, salt is weighed. The mainstream historical fact is plain many states and empires taxed salt because it was widely needed, relatively easy to regulate at production points or trade routes, and capable of producing steady revenue. A ruler can tax jewels, but not everyone buys jewels. A ruler can tax fine cloth, but many people go without it. Salt is different. Every household needs it. Every market handles it. Every army requires it. That makes salt a fiscal dream and a public irritation with crystals. You walk beside a salt merchant whose pack animals carry heavy loads from a producing district to an inland market. His cloak smells of rain, leather, and brine. He knows every toll station on the route, every bridge fee, every official who expects courtesy, and every unofficial helper who expects something even more direct. The salt grows more expensive with distance, not only because it is heavy, but because authority gathers around it like flies around a summer fish stall. State power in this era is learning to become intimate. It does not merely demand soldiers or tribute from afar. It reaches into daily life through measures, licenses, monopolies, and required purchases. Salt is perfect for this. You cannot easily hide your need for it. Your food gives you away. Your animals give you away. Your preserved meat, fish, cheese, and pickles all whisper, "Yes, we have met the salt seller." In some places, governments claim monopoly rights over salt production and sale. In others, they tax transport or regulate markets. Sometimes salt must be purchased from official depots at fixed prices. Sometimes private trade is allowed but burdened with duties. Sometimes rules are clear. Sometimes they are clear only to the official collecting the money, which is a special kind of historical fog. You pass an official salt storehouse. The building is thick-walled, dry, and guarded. Inside, the air bites at your lips. Salt dust lies on beams and floorboards. Workers shovel, measure, and pack. A buyer waits with a clay token or written permit. The process is slow enough to make everyone thoughtful and annoyed. The mineral that once came from sea, spring, mine, or desert now sits behind locks, waiting to be released at the proper price. A quirky tidbit appears in the shadow world of salt smuggling. In many regions, high salt taxes encourage people to sneak untaxed salt across borders, through marshes, over hills, by boat at night, or hidden among other goods. Some smugglers became local folk figures, not because they were noble saints, but because nobody loves an expensive salt law. Imagine risking punishment for a sack of seasoning. It sounds silly until your winter meat, your cheese, and your family's soup depend on it. You travel to a rural household where the tax feels less like policy and more like hunger. The room is low, smoky, and cold. A woman opens a small pouch and measures salt with painful care. Her hands are rough from washing, grinding, lifting, and mending. A pot of cabbage and grain steams near the fire. A little salt would make it comforting. Too little leaves it flat. Too much empties the pouch before market day. The state may think in revenue. The household thinks in pinches. Salt taxes often hurt the poor hardest. Wealthy people may grumble and pay. Poor families feel every increase in the cooking pot. Labourers need salt after sweating in fields, workshops, mines, and armies. Animals need it too. When salt becomes costly or restricted, it can affect nutrition, preservation, and local economies. A tax on salt is not simply a tax on taste, it is a tax on endurance. Empires also use salt revenue to fund war and administration. Armies require food that travels, and preserved supplies require salt. It is a neat little circle in a grim way. A state taxes salt to fund soldiers, then uses salt to feed soldiers, who may help enforce the system that taxes salt. History sometimes has the elegance of a locked door. Historians still debate how ordinary people responded to salt taxation in different regions. Some evidence shows open resistance, smuggling, petitions, and local unrest. Other places seem to have adapted through bargaining, evasion, seasonal purchase, or quiet resentment that rarely reached official records. The problem is that poor people often leave fewer documents than tax collectors. Ledgers preserve what was collected. They don't always preserve the sigh at the hearth. You walk through a market where official salt sits beside unofficial rumour. The legal seller has measured blocks and approved weights. Around the corner, someone may know someone who can get cheaper salt from across the boundary. Voices lower, eyes shift. A donkey flicks its ears, wisely refusing involvement. The atmosphere is thick with caution, opportunity, and the old human calculation of risk against need. There is tension in salt because it lives between nature and law. The sea dries into crystals without asking permission. Springs rise from the earth without stamps or seals. Mines formed long before any dynasty thought highly of itself. Yet rulers stand beside these gifts and say this now passes through us. Sometimes the control brings order, storage, road maintenance, and stable supply. Sometimes it brings corruption, inequality, and anger. Often it brings all of them together. Because history dislikes simple flavours. At sunset, the checkpoint quiets. The guard's spear leans against a post. The clerk closes his ledger. Mud cools under fading light. A trader leads his animals toward the next town, carrying less profit than he hoped and more frustration than he needs. In a nearby home, someone sprinkles a careful measure into stew. The crystals vanish at once, leaving only taste behind. That is the strange magic of taxed salt. The state can count it, guard it, price it, stamp it, and punish its illegal movement. But at the table, it dissolves into the body. It becomes warmth, strength, preservation, and memory. It makes power intimate. It makes politics edible. And in every age when rulers squeeze too tightly, the smallest white grain begins to carry a question: how much can necessity be controlled before ordinary people stop swallowing quietly? You enter France beneath a grey morning sky, where village roofs sag under damp thatch and the road shines with yesterday's rain. The air smells of wet earth, wood smoke, cabbage soup, horse manure, and cold stone. A church bell rings slowly across the fields, calling people into another day of work, prayer, taxes, and the weary discovery that the king's needs have once again become everyone else's problem. Here, salt has become a grievance. You walk into a country where the tax on salt is known as the gabelle. It is not one simple tax applied evenly and politely, because that would be far too merciful for old regime administration. Instead, the salt system varies by region. Some provinces pay heavily, others pay less. Some enjoy exemptions or special privileges. Boundaries between zones create confusion, resentment, and opportunity. A person living on one side of a line may pay much more than someone not far away. The map itself becomes unfair. The mainstream historical fact is clear: the French gabelle was one of the most hated taxes before the French Revolution. It forced many people in heavily taxed regions to buy a required amount of salt from royal storehouses at official prices. This was not merely a sales tax, it could be a compulsory purchase. The state was not simply saying, "Pay when you buy salt." It was saying, "You will buy this salt at this price from this place," because apparently soup now requires royal supervision. You stand outside a government salt depot, the Grenier à Sel. The building is thick and official, with guarded doors and the faint smell of dry mineral dust escaping when they open. Peasants arrive with coins they would rather spend on grain, shoes, tools, or almost anything else. Inside, clerks weigh salt and record purchases. The crystals are plain, but the mood around them is heavy. People do not look at salt here as flavour. They look at it as obligation. A woman in a coarse wool cloak waits in line. Her hands are chapped. Rain has darkened her sleeves. She needs salt for cooking, preserving pork, and keeping food through the colder months. But the official salt is expensive, and the required amount may not match her household's real needs. Too little salt means spoiled food. Too much compulsory salt means wasted money. Either way, the state has placed itself between her and the pantry. The unfairness grows sharper near tax borders. You walk along a lane between two regions where the price of salt changes dramatically. On one side, salt is costly and controlled. On the other, it may be cheaper. This invites smuggling, and smuggling invites patrols, informers, arrests, and punishments. The mineral becomes contraband. A sack of salt carried at night can feel like a sack of rebellion. A quirky tidbit comes from the smugglers known as faux sauniers, false salt workers or illegal salt dealers. Some were poor peasants carrying small amounts. Others belonged to organised networks. They moved through forests, marshes, back roads, and river routes, hiding salt under clothing, in carts, among hay, or wherever nervous imagination allowed. Picture someone sneaking through the dark with illicit seasoning, heart pounding, while somewhere a royal official insists this is very serious business. It was serious, of course, but history does enjoy absurd costumes. You move through a village after dusk. Dogs bark. A shutter closes quickly. A man arrives with a hidden packet of cheaper salt and the room falls quiet. The fire glows red. The smell of rye bread and weak soup hangs in the air. People know the risk. They also know the taste of resentment. When necessity is overpriced, law begins to feel less like justice and more like a net. The gabelle did not affect all French people equally, and that inequality mattered. France under the old regime was a patchwork of privileges, exemptions, historic rights, and regional arrangements. Nobles, clergy, towns, provinces, and corporate bodies often held special status. Ordinary rural households, especially in the harsher tax zones, carried burdens that felt arbitrary and humiliating. Salt made that unevenness visible every time a family cooked, cured meat, or counted coins. Historians still argue about how directly the gabelle helped cause the French Revolution. Some emphasize it as one grievance among many, alongside feudal dues, food shortages, debt, inequality, and political crisis. Others see it as especially powerful because it touched daily life so intimately. The uncertainty is important. Revolutions are not lit by one spark alone. They gather heat from many hearths, many ledgers, many empty bowls, and many people deciding they have been patient for long enough. You enter a modest kitchen in winter. The room is dim, the window covered against draughts. A pot of vegetables simmers over a low fire. A strip of pork hangs from a beam, preserved with salt that cost too much. The smoke scratches your throat. The floor is cold through your shoes. A child watches the pot with large eyes. The mother adds a pinch, carefully, almost angrily. The crystals vanish into the broth, but the tax remains in memory, pamphlets, complaints, and local anger carries salt into political language. When people list injustices, the gabelle appears again and again. It is easy to understand. You do not need a legal education to hate a tax that makes a basic necessity expensive. You do not need philosophy to know that neighbouring provinces should not live under wildly different burdens. Salt turns abstract inequality into something you can taste. The state, for its part, relies on revenue. Royal finances are strained by wars, court expenses, administration, and debt. Salt income helps support the machinery of monarchy. Officials defend the system as necessary, traditional, and orderly. But order feels different depending on which side of the counter you stand. To the clerk, the depot is administration. To the peasant, it is the place where hunger and authority shake hands. As night falls, you walk past the salt storehouse. The door is closed. The guard pulls his cloak tighter. Frost gathers along the edge of the road. Somewhere beyond the fields, smugglers may be moving quietly beneath bare trees. Somewhere in the village, soup is being salted with official crystals or forbidden ones. Either way, the taste carries politics. In France, salt becomes more than preservation. It becomes proof that power has reached too far into the lives of ordinary people. The gabelle transforms a mineral of survival into a symbol of unequal rule, a daily reminder that privilege can sit beside poverty and call itself law. You hold a few grains in your hand, pale and harmless in appearance, yet in this kingdom they carry the weight of resentment, the scratch of ledgers, the whisper of smugglers, and the slow-rising pressure of a society preparing to break. You step into the industrial age through a doorway of steam, coal smoke, and ambition. The air is thicker now, it tastes faintly metallic on the tongue. Chimneys rise above towns like dark fingers, carts rattle over cobbles, canal water slaps against stone walls. Somewhere, a factory whistle cries across the morning, and hundreds of people move toward work with lunch pails, stiff backs, and the quiet knowledge that machines do not care if you slept badly. Salt has entered a new life. It is still on the table, still in barrels, still in kitchens and curing rooms, but now it also stands at the foundation of industry. The little white crystal that once preserved fish and pork becomes raw material for chemistry. It feeds the making of soda ash, glass, soap, bleaching powder, chlorine, hydrochloric acid, and later whole branches of modern manufacturing. Salt stops being only a pantry companion and becomes a factory citizen, which sounds like a promotion until you smell the neighbourhood. You walk beside a canal in England where boats carry coal, limestone, brine, salt, and manufactured goods between growing industrial towns. The water is dull and oily, reflecting warehouses and low clouds. Horses pull barges along the towpath, their hooves thudding softly in mud. The smell is damp rope, coal smoke, horse sweat, and brine from nearby works. Everything moves slowly, but in great quantity. Industry is not always fast. Sometimes it is simply relentless. A mainstream historical fact belongs here in the 18th and 19th centuries. Salt became essential to the chemical industry, especially through processes that use sodium chloride to produce alkali compounds. Soda ash was needed for glass, soap, paper, and textiles. Demand grew as factories grew. A mineral once measured by the household pinch now moved through furnaces, vats, railways, canals, and ledgers measured in tons. You enter a saltworks where brine is pumped from underground and boiled in iron pans. Heat roars beneath the pans, steam clouds the rafters. Workers rake crystals from evaporating brine, their shirts damp, their faces shiny with sweat. Salt crust forms on tools, beams, boots, and skin. When you touch a railing, it feels gritty. When you breathe, the air scratches slightly. The work is hot, wet, repetitive, and loud. The crystals look pure, but the labour around them is anything but delicate. In some regions, rock salt mining expands dramatically. Shafts go down into the earth. Miners descend by rope, ladder, or lift, carrying lamps into the underground dark. The mine smells of dust, lamp oil, damp stone, and human effort. Pick strikes echo in galleries where walls shine white, grey, pink, or reddish-brown. Salt deposits lie in thick beds formed by ancient seas that dried long before any factory owner learned to shout about efficiency. You place your hand on a wall of rock salt. It is cool and solid. A lamp flame trembles beside it, making the crystals glitter like trapped stars. Above ground, factories belch smoke. Below ground, the old seabed waits in silence, broken apart by iron, gunpowder, and muscle. There is something strange in this ancient evaporated oceans becoming modern glass windows, soap bars, bleached cloth, and chemical reagents. The deep past is being shoveled into the modern world. A quirky tidbit rises from the mines of Cheshire and other salt districts, where underground spaces carved by extraction could be vast enough to feel like cathedrals, without stained glass or polite choirs. Some old salt mines later found unusual second lives for storage, tourism, or even preserving documents because the dry, stable conditions can be useful. Salt, once again, refuses to stay in one job description. It preserves bacon, bodies, roads, and occasionally paperwork. Very versatile, slightly smug. The industrial chemistry of salt changes everyday life in quiet ways. Soap becomes more available as alkali production improves. Glass production benefits from chemical inputs. Textiles are bleached and processed. Paper, dyes, and later disinfectants draw from chemical networks that begin, in part, with brine and salt. The mineral dissolves into industry just as it dissolves into soup. You may not see it in the finished object, but it is there in the chain of transformation. You pass a soapworks. The smell is sharp, fatty, alkaline, and not specially romantic. Workers stir large vats. Steam rises. Blocks are cut, stacked, stamped, and shipped. Cleaner clothes and bodies are not only moral achievements, despite what stern pamphlets might suggest. They are chemical and industrial achievements too. Salt sits behind them, hidden in processes that turn raw substances into household goods. In another district, chemical factories produce bleaching powder and chlorine compounds. These bring benefits and hazards together. Cleaner water, disinfectants, paper, textiles, and sanitation are tied to chemical advances. But factories also release dangerous fumes, pollute waterways, and expose workers to risks. Progress arrives wearing a stained apron. It offers soap with one hand and smoke with the other. History, as usual, declines to be tidy. Historians still debate how to weigh the benefits of salt-based industrial chemistry against the environmental and human costs of early chemical manufacturing. Some emphasize the enormous improvements in hygiene, materials, and production. Others focus on polluted rivers, damaged lungs, harsh labour, and communities forced to live beside fumes and waste. Both are part of the same landscape. The clean white crystal enters dark, dirty systems and comes out as modern convenience. You walk through a workers' neighbourhood at dusk. Brick houses stand close together. Laundry hangs grey in the smoky air. Children play near a canal, their boots muddy. A woman salts a pot of potatoes and cabbage while factory soot settles on the windowsill. The same salt that feeds chemical furnaces still sits on her table, measured carefully into dinner. Industrial history is not separate from domestic life. It comes home on clothing, in wages, in illness, in soap, in food, in the smell of coal that never quite leaves the room. Railways accelerate the movement of salt. Iron tracks cut across fields and towns. Trains carry bulk goods farther and faster than carts or pack animals ever could. Salt from mines and brine districts reaches factories, ports, cities, and rural shops. Prices shift. Supply widens. Local scarcity gives way, in many places, to national and international markets. The mineral becomes less mysterious, less regional, more standardized. It is packed, branded, refined, and sold with increasing regularity. Refinement changes appearance and expectation. Consumers begin to prefer cleaner, whiter, finer salt. Impurities are removed. Anti-caking habits and packaging will come later in fuller modern form, but the direction is already visible. Salt becomes less like a rough local substance and more like a predictable product. A pinch in one town should resemble a pinch in another. Industry loves uniformity almost as much as officials love fees. Night settles over the industrial town. The factory windows glow orange. A train passes in the distance, its rhythm fading into the dark. In the salt works, fires keep burning. In the mine, tools rest for a few hours beside walls of ancient sea. In homes, supper is eaten quietly, with salt on potatoes, salt in bread, salt in cured meat, salt hidden in the soap near the wash basin, and in the glass of the window reflecting the lamp. The mineral has changed shape without changing nature. It still preserves, seasons, and sustains. But now it also reacts, bleaches, cleans, hardens, softens, and feeds the machinery of modern life. You hold a white crystal between finger and thumb, and it seems too small to carry factories inside it. Yet it does. In the industrial age, salt becomes a bridge from appetite to chemistry, from the old kitchen barrel to the roaring furnace, from ancient seas beneath the ground to the bright, complicated promise of the modern world. You arrive on a warm March morning in India, where dust lifts softly beneath thousands of feet, and the air hums with a strange mixture of fatigue, hope, and restraint. The road stretches ahead through villages, fields, palms, and low scrub. Birds call from trees. Cotton cloth rustles in the breeze. Somewhere, a spinning wheel turns with a dry, gentle rhythm, and somewhere else a cooking fire sends up the smell of millet, lentils, smoke, and tea. A man walks at the centre of the crowd, slight in body, wrapped in simple cloth, carrying a staff. His pace is steady, not dramatic. The movement around him is calm, almost quiet, but history is gathering in the dust. This is the Salt March. In 1930, Mohandas Karamchand Gandhi led a march from Sabarmati Ashram to the coastal village of Dandi to protest British colonial salt laws. The journey covered roughly 240 miles and lasted from March 12th to April 6th. Its purpose was clear and brilliant in its simplicity: to challenge the British monopoly on salt by making salt from the sea. A handful of crystals became an act of civil disobedience, and the world noticed. You walk with the marchers through the heat. The road is uneven beneath your feet. Fine dust clings to ankles and hems. The sun presses down, but the mood is disciplined. People gather at the roadside, some silent, some whispering, some folding their hands in greeting. Villagers offer water, food, and shelter. The smell of sweat, earth, cow dung, jasmine, and wood smoke drifts through the air. This is not the noise of an army. It is the sound of people choosing to move together without weapons. Salt is the perfect symbol because it belongs to everyone. Rich and poor need it. Hindus, Muslims, Sikhs, Christians, Parsis, Jains, and people of many other communities need it. Farmers need it. Labourers need it. Children need it. Even the British officials who taxed it needed it on their own tables, which is the kind of irony history quietly sets down like a cup of tea. The British salt laws controlled production and sale, preventing many Indians from freely making their own salt. Even along the sea where salt could be naturally obtained, people had to buy taxed salt, and the burden fell heavily on the poor. Gandhi understood that salt could speak where long speeches might not. You do not have to explain constitutional theory to someone who cannot afford a basic necessity. You show them the salt tax, and the unfairness is already there, sharp on the tongue. You pass through a village where people have waited for hours to see the marchers. Women stand in doorways with brass pots. Children peer from behind elders. A farmer with cracked heels bows slightly as the group passes. The atmosphere is not festive exactly. It is more serious than that. It feels like a vow being carried in public. A quirky tidbit belongs to Gandhi's careful planning. Before the march began, he wrote to the British Viceroy, Lord Irwin, explaining his objections and warning of civil disobedience if demands were ignored. It was, in a very Gandhian way, both polite and devastating. Imagine receiving a courteous letter that essentially says, "I regret to inform you that I will now proceed to undermine your empire with seawater." The British administration did not find it as funny as history sometimes does. Each day, the march grows in meaning. Newspapers report it. Crowds swell. International observers begin to pay attention. Gandhi's slow walk turns into a moving stage on which colonial power looks oddly nervous. The British Empire has soldiers, courts, prisons, police, ships, and flags. Gandhi has a staff, sandals, discipline, and a plan to pick up salt. Power does not always recognize danger when it arrives barefoot. You feel the texture of the march in small details. A blister forms under your foot. The cloth at your shoulder grows stiff with dried sweat. At night, the air cools, and bodies rest under simple coverings. You hear murmured prayers, coughs, insects, and the low talk of volunteers organizing the next day. Food is plain, sleep is thin, yet there is calm purpose in the discomfort. The body aches, but the mind stays awake. Historians still argue about how much the Salt March directly changed British policy in the immediate term. Some emphasise that the salt laws did not vanish at once, and that repression continued. Others stress that the march transformed the freedom struggle by widening participation, drawing global attention, and making colonial injustice visible through a simple act. Both views carry weight. The salt did not break the empire in one morning, but it cracked the image of unquestioned authority. At Dundee, the sea waits. You arrive before dawn on April 6th. The shore is quiet, pale, and damp. Waves slide in and withdraw, leaving foam on sand. The smell is briny and fresh. Gandhi walks toward the beach, bends down, and lifts a small lump of salty mud or crystallized salt from the ground. The gesture is almost absurdly small. No palace falls, no cannon fires, no crown shatters in the surf. Yet the law has been broken in front of everyone, and the empire has been made to look very large and very foolish. Across India, people begin making salt, selling illegal salt, marching, protesting, and courting arrest. Women participate in large numbers, stepping into public activism through salt making, picketing, and organising. Students, workers, villagers, and political leaders join campaigns. The movement spreads beyond the beach, beyond Gandhi's own steps, into towns and homes where salt becomes a sign of defiance. You stand near a clay pot where seawater is being boiled. Steam rises gently. The fire snaps. A woman stirs the brine while children watch with solemn excitement. When crystals form, they are rough, damp, and greyish, hardly the refined salt of a shop. But they taste of freedom because they were made without permission. The salt scratches the palm and sparkles faintly in the sun. Later, repression comes. People are arrested. Marchers are beaten at demonstrations. Prisons fill. The struggle remains disciplined but costly. The soundscape changes police orders. Crowd prayers, footsteps, the closing of cell doors. Salt has become a test of courage. To break the salt law is to say that even the smallest necessity cannot belong entirely to an empire. Evening falls over the coast. The light softens on the water. A breeze moves through palms. The salt pans and cooking pots rest. But the idea continues moving. You hold a few illegal crystals in your hand, and they feel almost weightless. Yet they carry miles of walking. Letters, blisters, village greetings, prison walls, and the quiet force of people refusing to accept injustice as ordinary. Here, salt becomes peaceful resistance. It is not a weapon in the violent sense. It wounds no body. It burns no house. It simply reveals the absurdity of controlling what the sea freely leaves behind. On the shore at Dundee, the mineral of preservation becomes the mineral of protest, keeping alive a nation's demand to stand upright, breathe freely, and taste its own salt without asking permission. You wake inside the modern world, though modern life, being slightly rude, has already been awake for hours. A truck passes outside on a winter road. Somewhere, a refrigerator hums. Water moves through pipes behind a wall. A hospital corridor shines under pale light. In a kitchen drawer, a salt packet waits beside takeout menus and mismatched batteries. Because even civilization has junk drawers, salt is everywhere now, but it has become quieter. You no longer need to follow animal tracks to a lick, cross desert routes, bribe a guard, or stand in line at an official depot just to season dinner. In many places, salt is cheap, packaged, standardized, and almost invisible in its abundance. It sits in cardboard cylinders, glass grinders, paper packets, plastic tubs, restaurant shakers, frozen meals, cured meats, breads, cheeses, sauces, snacks, and canned soups. It has slipped from treasure into background noise. The mainstream historical fact is clear in the modern era. Most salt is not used for food at all. Large amounts go into industry, water treatment, road desing, chemical production, and agriculture. The salt on your table is only a tiny visible portion of a vast mineral system. The old crystal has not retired into the kitchen. It has taken a full-time job in infrastructure. You stand beside a winter highway at night. The air is bitter, metallic, and and sharp in your lungs. Snow falls through the glow of streetlights. A salt truck rumbles past, scattering rock salt over the asphalt. The grains strike the road with a dry hiss, then vanish into slush. Salt lowers the freezing point of water, helping ice melt and making roads safer. It is practical, effective, and widely used in cold regions. But the story is not perfectly clean. Road salt can wash into soil, rivers, lakes, and groundwater. It can harm plants, affect freshwater ecosystems, corrode vehicles, damage bridges, and leave white crusts on boots and sidewalks. Modern convenience, as usual. Arrives with a receipt attached. You watch the slush glow under headlights. Useful and troubling at the same time. Salt saves drivers from skidding, then drifts into places that never ask for seasoning. You move into a water treatment facility, where the sound changes to pumps, valves, and flowing pressure. The air smells damp, faintly chlorinated, and metallic. In many homes, salt is used in water softeners. Hard water contains minerals such as calcium and magnesium. A softening system exchanges those ions, often using sodium from salt brine to regenerate resin beads. This is not poetic, but neither is scrubbing mineral scale from a kettle for the 5th time, so we accept the chemistry. In a hospital, salt appears in a gentler form. Sterile saline solution. Water with carefully measured salt helps clean wounds, hydrate patients, rinse eyes, and carry medicines. The body recognizes the balance. Saline is not magical. It is simple, controlled, and deeply useful. You hear soft footsteps in the corridor, the muted beep of a monitor, the whisper of a curtain being drawn. Salt here is not power or tax. It is care measured drop by drop. A quirky tidbit comes from the snack aisle, that glowing corridor of human weakness. Many processed foods contain salt not only for taste, but also for texture, preservation, fermentation control, and flavour balance. In bread, salt strengthens dough and slows yeast. In cheese, it shapes moisture and microbial life. In pickles, it guides brine. In chips, it helps create the cheerful illusion that you will stop after one handful. History cannot confirm that last promise, and neither can your couch. You step into a supermarket. The air is cool and bright. Carts squeak, freezers hum, packages shout with colours, claims, and suspiciously happy vegetables. Salt hides in ingredient lists under familiar names: sodium chloride, sodium bicarbonate, monosodium glutamate, sodium nitrate, sodium benzoate. Not all of the same substance, but they show how sodium compounds thread through modern food. The mineral world has become chemical vocabulary. Health debates gather around salt with understandable intensity. Human bodies need sodium, but too much sodium can contribute to high blood pressure in many people, increasing risk for heart disease and stroke. Public health authorities often recommend reducing excess sodium intake, especially from processed foods. At the same time, individual needs vary by health condition, climate, activity, and diet. Salt is necessary, but necessity is not permission to pour it like confetti over every meal. Very tragic. Yes, historians of food still argue about when modern societies crossed from salt scarcity into salt excess. Some emphasize industrial food processing, urban diets, and mass distribution in the 19th and 20th centuries. Others point to older traditions of heavy salting for preservation that only slowly gave way to refrigeration. The uncertainty reminds you that abundance does not arrive everywhere at once. Some communities moved quickly into cheap salt and processed foods. Others continued older rhythms much longer. Refrigeration changed salt's daily role. When cold storage became common, households no longer needed to preserve as much meat or fish with heavy salting. Fresh foods could last longer. Frozen goods could travel. The old curing barrel lost some of its authority, but salt did not disappear. It moved into flavour, industry, medicine, chemistry, and processed convenience. It became less visible precisely because it became more widely embedded. You stand in a modern kitchen at midnight. The room is quiet except for the refrigerator's soft motor and the faint tick of cooling pipes. On the counter sits a small bowl of salt, fine and white. Nearby are soy sauce, cheese, bread, olives, pickles, canned tomatoes, and a packet of instant noodles waiting with suspicious confidence. Even when you do not reach for the salt shaker, salt has already arrived. The atmosphere is calm, ordinary, almost too familiar. Yet every object points outward. The table salt may come from an underground mine, an evaporated sea, a solar pond, or a vacuum evaporation plant. The road outside may be salted in winter. The hospital down the street stores saline. The water softener in a basement waits for another cycle. The factory beyond town may use salt chemistry in ways you never see. Modern salt has become both humble and enormous. It is cheap enough to spill without panic, yet important enough to move by the million tons. It is a public health concern, an environmental challenge, an industrial feedstock, a kitchen staple, a hospital fluid, a winter tool, and a flavour that still wakes food from sleep. You pinch a few grains between your fingers. They feel dry, clean, almost weightless. They no longer announce wealth. They no longer require a caravan or royal permit, but they carry the whole machinery of modern life in miniature roads kept open. Water made soft, bodies treated, factories supplied, food stabilized, meals brightened. Salt has not become less powerful. It has become familiar, and familiarity is one of power's quietest disguises. You return at last to the crystal itself, resting in your palm as if it has never caused a tax revolt, funded a city, fed an army, crossed a desert, filled a ledger, or made a bowl of soup worth finishing. It is small, pale, and quiet. The room around you is still. Somewhere beyond the window, Night presses gently against the glass. The air smells faintly of linen, cooled tea, and the clean mineral trace left on your fingertips. Salt looks simple because it has learned modesty. A grain of salt does not explain where it came from. It might have been lifted from seawater under a hard sun, carved from an underground mine, pumped from brine hidden beneath fields, or scraped from a dry lake where water vanished long ago. It might be young in your kitchen, but ancient in the earth, born from seas that disappeared before human beings ever opened their eyes to the sky. You hold it, and you are holding a memory of water. The mainstream historical fact is steady, and white salt has remained essential across human history because it supports life, preserves food, flavors meals, aids industry, and carries symbolic meaning in many cultures. Few substances have moved so easily between body, economy, ritual, and state power. Gold dazzles, silk seduces, spices charm the nose. Salt simply waits until everyone admits they need it. You walk through an imagined museum with no walls. In one corner, a prehistoric fire glows beside dried meat. In another, clay pots boil brine until steam clouds the air. Farther away, a desert caravan sways under the stars. A Roman road holds wagon tracks. A medieval mine echoes with picks. A Venetian clerk closes a ledger. A French peasant hides contraband crystals in a fold of cloth. A marcher bends at the edge of the Indian Ocean. None of these scenes are the same, yet all are touched by the same mineral brightness. Salt's power comes from dissolving. That is its little trick. It vanishes into food, blood, brine, tears, and snowmelt. And because it disappears, people forget how much it has done. It does not remain visible like a coin or crown. It enters the body and becomes a movement, thought, thirst, sweat, and balance. It enters food and becomes flavor. It enters law and becomes resentment. It enters ritual and becomes purity. Very busy for something that cannot even introduce itself at parties. You stand in a kitchen where bread cools on a board. The crust crackles softly. A pot of soup breathes steam. A hand reaches for salt and adds only a pinch. The change is immediate but almost invisible. Carrot tastes more like carrot. Onion grows deeper. Broth becomes rounder. Salt does not replace the food. It reveals it. Perhaps that is why it became such a strong metaphor in so many traditions. It has a way of making things more themselves. A quirky tidbit belongs to language. Around the world, salt slips into phrases about wisdom, loyalty, wit, work, and worth. People speak of being worth one's salt, taking something with a grain of salt, or sharing bread and salt. In different tongues, salt can mean sharp intelligence, faithful service, hospitality, or suspicion. A mineral so ordinary that it sits beside dinner somehow becomes a grammar of human judgment. Honestly, that is quite a career for a rock. Salt also teaches humility about value. It has been cheap in some places and precious in others. Near the sea, it may be common. Deep inland, it may become costly. Under monopoly, it may feel oppressive. In abundance, it may become a health concern. Value is not fixed inside the crystal. Value forms around need, distance, labour, scarcity, law, and memory. The same grain can be pantry dust or political fire, depending on who controls it and who hungers for it. Scholars continue to debate how to measure salt's influence compared with other necessities such as grain, waters to fuel, and livestock. Some emphasize salt as a driver of trade routes and state revenue. Others warn against making one mineral explain too much, because human societies are always shaped by many forces at once. The uncertainty is healthy. Salt is not the only key to history. It is more like a small key that opens many side doors. You walk outside into a wide, quiet landscape. It could be a salt flat under moonlight, a beach after tide, a winter road, or a mountain mine sleeping under snow. The air is cool. Underfoot, the ground may crunch faintly. The horizon is silver. Silence gathers, but not emptiness. Salt landscapes often feel bare, yet they are full of stories: vanished seas, patient workers, animals licking mineral earth, traders measuring loads, households saving food, rulers counting revenue, and rebels deciding that even a handful of crystals can speak. This is why salt remains. It belongs to survival, but also to memory. It keeps food from decay, and it keeps human experiences from seeming separate. The same need links the fisher salting a catch, the mother seasoning stew, the monk eating preserved fish, the miner cutting a tunnel, the scientist preparing saline, and the road worker scattering crystals before ice. Different centuries, different hands, same clean taste. You close your fingers gently around the salt. The grains press into your skin, tiny and angular. They are not soft, but they are familiar. They have crossed the boundaries between nature and culture more often than almost any substance on Earth. Salt is geology made edible. It is chemistry made social. It is necessity made symbolic. It is the mineral that taught people to preserve, travel, tax, trade, cleanse, resist, and remember. Now the world grows quieter. The fire lowers in the hearth of imagination. The caravans rest. The salt pans cool beneath the moon. The ledgers close. The ships settle against their ropes. The mines fall silent, and the kitchens soften into darkness. A final grain dissolves on the tongue, bright for a moment, then gone into warmth. You breathe slowly. The long history loosens its hold and becomes only a pale shimmer, like moonlight over still water. The crystal returns to silence, and you return with it, lighter now, drifting beyond roads, markets, empires, and shores, into a calm place where nothing needs to be carried, counted, taxed, or kept. Only the night remains, gentle and wide, holding every small thing safely until morning.